500.
Today is February 8th, 2021, and we will resume the agenda from the February 1st meeting, and this meeting tonight will start at 5:35 p.m. We will pick back up with agenda item number 9 to receive an update regarding special education in Lewiston Public Schools. And Jake's going to lead this discussion.
So as we recessed last week, we were in the midst of asking questions that I could take notes on so that we could go back and do some research and some work around those. Member Physic had shared some, Member Beauport had shared some, and Member Parfit had shared some, but there were numerous other things that were popping up on the recess. We wanted to start with that item, and I can take notes on questions you had. And again, just to revisit last time, this was intended so that we could do the research for you to figure out what the answers are, and then report back out to you in a way that we probably chunk this out so that we could dive deeper if we need to in any specific area of special education. So that is any additional questions people want to raise?
Ms. Wright.
So as part of Director Emery's, that's not the right name, presentation, there were I had a concern about under Connors and Montello, we were missing some numbers from 2018 to 2019 on IEP meetings. And so the question I had was, what is our legal obligation to keep that paperwork, and how are we doing so in a way that we can then pull it again when we need that information?
Any other questions related to special ed? Mr. Physic?
No, I asked a lot of questions last week, so I
Okay, you're gonna let me do the deluge this time. In terms of the IEP team process, just trying to understand better which administrators must be present and how those are assigned at each meeting. I know the parent, special education teacher, general ed teacher, but administrator feels very vague, and when trying to help constituents and parents and families with that, what's the best way to identify who that person is, and is it the same person over time? And I will yield to Mr. Physic.
Did you have something?
No, it's you go ahead.
No, go ahead, because I actually.
Well, my only question is that Member Physic, Member Buckland, Member Pott raised a lot of important questions last week, and I was just curious if there had been any of those that had come back with answers in the interim recess here, or if that's
No, without having
more
all the
involved
questions,
progress.
yeah, we get the rest of the notes.
Jake, can I ask these are pretty entailed questions that we gave you, and we have the budget coming up starting first week of March. And there's going to be a lot of work there, and it's kind of squeamish because until we get to a point where I totally understand special ed and the numbers, I'm not ready to at least tackle special ed in the budget part, so what's the timing looking like to be able to report out, and what meeting? Is this sort of like we might be able to get answers before we start the budget process, or are these answers going to come in the middle of the budget process and we'll hold off on special ed until we get those, or what's it looking like?
I think some of the more basic answers are things that we can get a turnaround time on, that's pretty quick. I think as we get into more complicated things, it's research that has to be done to dig into the answers and the procedures and how long they've been in place, and then looking at Department of Education protocols and procedures that have been established by resolutions for complaints or things of that nature. So some of those things are going to take time to dig into. I can pledge you that I'll get you the information I can with a short turnaround as fast as possible, but some of these things will take time. Certainly there's other things going on in the state as well.
So moving forward, can I just ask that the special ed budget be pushed back to the back of the budgetary review so that we're able to get as much information as possible when we take it up.
I mean, that's fine with me.
Mr. Physics, did you want to ask your question?
So I guess a couple of concerns for me would be if people came to, if the IEPT came to consensus and the supervisor kind of disagreed. You know, some of these people have been doing special ed for years. And not to say that the supervisor may not have not, but you know, a lot of times the people who are teachers have been doing teaching for a while. And the tiebreaker kind of goes to the supervisor and manager, and it's almost like you got someone who's got all this experience, number one, then you have the team that comes to a consensus about a kid who really knows this kid, who's been kind of working with them, and then the supervisor and manager kind of doesn't really know the kid or familiar with the situation, just kind of being told kind of what goes on in the meeting, and then the tiebreaker goes to them. And I don't know if there's another way for a better consensus to happen if the team agrees and the manager doesn't. A better mechanism for finding what's best for the kid versus kind of just saying, hey, well, she's a supervisor, so she gets the tying, or he or she gets the tying, breaks the tie. And is there a way for almost anonymity? So if someone wants to speak out about what's going on, because the way we've done it, like, you know, is, you know, I don't want to go too in the weeds here, but it shouldn't be the same person speaking up, or case manager should feel empowered to speak up what's best for this kid, especially when they've been dealing with them. And if the case manager or the staff feels like they can't, then, you know, we should build a way to some sort of anonymity or something that's, and this kind of goes overall with teachers, but since we're in special ed, that they can come and maybe disagree with some little anonymity versus kind of like, you know, because in the end, we want to do what's best for the kid. And if the kid is not getting the best, you know, because, you know, a teacher's not speaking up and just go along with the plan, or you have someone from the outside who's not maybe familiar with the situation, it just seems like we got to come up with a better system for that respectful disagreement. And I think kind of the compromise right now temporarily would be like some sort of anonymity box, or however you want to take it.
I can catch it.
Mr. Madeira's thoughts.
Yeah, I'm building off of what Member Physic raised. You know, I have heard from folks indicating that sometimes staff members, and I won't go into, you know, over much detail because they're anonymity, but you know, staff members have sometimes felt like they're under pressure to downplay the needs of special ed students to reduce the resources that the district is being asked to allocate to a particular student. And, you know, I just want to make it clear that from my perspective, and I just strongly suspect that I speak for everyone on this committee, we're fervently opposed to that. And, you know, any staff member in Lewiston Public Schools should feel as though they are able to make a full and informed recommendation without regard to the resources required to meet the needs of any particular special education student. And if any pressure is brought to bear on them to suggest that maybe they should downplay something or opt for a cheaper solution, I hope that they'll come privately to the board directly so that we can solve that, because I don't think anybody up here has any interest in anything other than making sure that every student gets exactly what they need.
Ms. Whitlam?
I just want to say, hey, it is a problem. So what Mr. Physic is saying is a huge problem. So I would, obviously be in favor of something, if we could figure out how do we put something in place where, the special ed teachers or the general ed teachers don't feel like they can't speak up in those meetings and advocate for that child appropriately. So thank you, Mr. Physick, for saving us.
Mr. Butler?
I hate to build on this, Jake, but it's out there. Like I've said before, the majority of my constituents are those that have special needs students. Same story, echoing the exact same thing, that they feel let down, they're not being heard, or there's a barrier there for whoever is involved in that IEP to be able to present 100%. I'm not sure exactly what the politics of that whole situation is, even to the point where parents have asked me to come to their IEP meetings, inviting me to be there, and I assume to advocate for them. And I've avoided doing so. I mean, I don't like the conflict, but, we're at that point. I mean, it's really, there's a lot of grinding going out there right now with this special ed piece. And I think that's definitely one area we gotta dig into to make it more comprehensive for the parents and the students.
Mr. Wright?
I think too, as we have reflected on this conversation prior to now, up to now, I don't feel like the question has been answered, what does a successful special education program look like in Lewiston? And what we then need to get there. And I'm sure we could find a million ways to spend more money, but if we're not able to find qualified staff, is it a partnership with UMaine Farmington and their program, identifying the needs that we have from staff and kind of creating a pipeline there? Is it incentives for teachers to go and do their own professional development, so it doesn't take up in-classroom learning time, things like that? I think if we can identify what that is, what that looks like, and I realize it's difficult because it's a system trying to address individual needs, but I think if we are able to encapsulate that, then we have something to move toward, instead of, I feel like, even though it's helpful and productive criticism, it's stuff we want to move away from. And so I think that aspiration of whatever that goal looks like and clearly defining that will be really important. Some of this other stuff will come along the way, clarifying the roles and responsibilities and making sure people know who to turn to in the moment. But I think that just setting that overall, and for us to know, is the next step the IEP audit, or is the next step finding more qualified staff and, turning HR towards that? I mean, it has to be a whole system effort, it sounds like.
Mr. Physick?
So I know what goes on a lot because special ed is not the most desired occupation in the school system. So a lot of times they offer I forget what they call it, but you can work your way towards the endorsement of a special ed certification. And so I think the biggest thing is we've had special ed teachers leave because they felt like they haven't gotten the respect that is needed. So some of the things I brought up last week in terms of the report cards, producing more work. So how the teachers are saying how much work they have to do this year, this is a normal occurrence for a special ed teacher. So before COVID, just imagine a special ed teacher, just this is their normal day of being a teacher, a case manager, and being a supervisor. And a lot of times in some of the schools, depending on, the leadership, a lot of times the special ed teachers aren't getting the their planning time. And that's the reality of it, or the staff's getting pulled to cover another need into the building. And so, it becomes burdensome when you have 37 kids on your caseload and they're supposed to get special design instruction. So you normally, right, you would think of you're thinking more than likely 3 or 4 kids separate in a classroom able to do that. But the reality is you go into a special ed classroom, you're gonna see 10, 15 kids. They might as well just be in the regular classroom that they're in, because they're not getting the special design, they're not getting that small group mentality. Now, some of it, a lot of it's on school size. I mean, you go to a school like Leeds Central School, and you walk in their resource room, you literally have like 3 or 4 kids, kind of the way it should be. And I understand that we have a larger size, but I think it has to start with thinking with special ed in mind first, because I still don't know how special ed works with general ed. It seems like special ed is an afterthought, and some of the examples I outlined last week. And I don't want to give specific examples because I don't want to turn it into a negative connotation about somebody. But what I've heard in the past 3 years, it's like the special ed and kind of the general ed, they're not speaking to each other in terms of top of the leadership chain. And so if that's not working together, then I mean, how do you expect to, that stuff just trickles down to the building where it's just an afterthought. And and a big thing, especially like the teachers complain about, again, is curriculum. You really have no curriculum. I mean, I know personally myself, I've spent days Xeroxing kits, okay, because the special ed doesn't have enough kits, or you see an incomplete kit, so now we have to like make pieces around it, and that's just more tedious for a teacher to try to do that, along with balancing everything you have to do: IEP, case manager, supervising ed techs, and on top of that, every kid has to have their own lesson plan, basically. So can you imagine if there's 30-something kids have to have their own individual lesson plan? That's another thing that's looked upon. So I know a lot of people would say, well, gee, they don't have that many kids. Well, every kid has to have their own special lesson plan. And sometimes you might be able to group them. If some of the kids are in the same areas, you might be able to attack it a little bit together with reading groups or math groups or something if they're on the same level. But the reality is a lot of the kids they're on so many different levels that the special ed teacher is just trying to stay above water. And sometimes they're grouping people and have no business being in that group. But again, to attack it, to attack some of the shortcomings of staff, they're doing these things. And I think a lot of special ed teachers are just looking for, just a little saying, hey, I don't want to use respect, but along those lines of saying, hey, provide us the tools that we need to get this done, and don't take away the tools that we need. It's pretty obvious. I've been in a couple special ed classes. I won't name the school because, again, I don't want to turn this into a negative connotation where we're being negative towards a building principal. But the reality is certain schools, there's always the same complaints coming from the same teachers, and there's certain schools that don't have it. Some of it has to do with the level that it has the same demographic, but some of it has to do is that the supervisor has done this job a long time before they even became a supervisor. So they're able to work with the special ed teachers. They're able to work around those kinks. A lot of those kinks don't even go up all the way up to the Dingley building because they've been in that position a while, so they're able to provide what that kid needs. And so after all this, 10-minute spiel that I've been saying, I would suggest that we really, look at, and I hope leadership doesn't take us the wrong way, that we look at really treating special ed in Lewiston as equals, because that's really kind of what's going on, is we're not treated as equals, and everything gets trickled down with all the things that I've outlined last week, and as far as what I just outlined and what I just said.
So, thank you. So least restrictive environment. And I'm wondering if you all are familiar with that term. I cringe every time I hear that in an IEP meeting. And it says least restrictive environment says that children who receive special education should learn in the least restrictive environment. Oh, that sounds beautiful, doesn't it? That is the worst thing you can hear, because that's the special ed team saying, we're going to keep your special needs, special education child in the regular classroom as much as possible, when they shouldn't be. It's their way of getting around actually getting a one-on-one or putting them in the appropriate class. I've dealt with that time and time again. I don't know if this is a term that we can take out of this district. I don't know if we can. I think it's a like law or whatever, but it's, yeah, it's something that we need to really look at, because just because it means they should spend as much time as possible with peers who do not receive special education does not mean that you should for every child. Not every child needs to be in that classroom with regular teachers and students that can learn on pace. That, you know how hard that's gotta be for the teachers teaching? And then the other kids learning, when the kids that have the special education kids are in a classroom, they can't follow anything that's going on. They're not getting the help that they need. The regular gen ed class teacher is spending so much time trying to help this one child or 2 or 3 children, but they don't have the ability to teach their lessons. So I think this is a real problem, and I don't know if this is something that is Lewiston specific. I think this is whoever's making these laws need to really look at what that means and how it's being interpreted through districts and states.
Mr. Pop.
So Jacob, I'll build upon what was brought up last week. Paul brought it up, but I jumped on it too, about the idea of the outplacements. That was a fairly big number. What was it at again?
116.
116. And as you research that, I was also wondering, you know, what Tanya just referred to, the least restrictive environment. If we did cross that line to decide to try to get these kids back into the district, and we were going to develop programs that would address these outplaced students, would we be looking at a school situation that they would be able to get the high level? I assume the outplacements are the high level that are needed, and those type of services. And of course, you know, with our experience in Auburn, you know, we have RETC that we specifically designed to do that, and it worked fairly well. So, but it worked fairly well for Auburn. And so my question is, do we need to mimic that in for Lewiston, or are we looking at the language of the least restrictive environment and creating programs within the existing structures that are going to be able to address those heavy duty needs? So I'm just kind of curious which direction, if we did choose to go in to try to get these kids back, would we need to look at more programming in the existing schools, or would we actually be looking at a whole new school to address these? Their needs are you know, just at high level. So it's not something like what she just described, you know, that they can be in a regular classroom and work it. So I'm kind of like between the vice here, that, you know, I'm hearing, okay, you don't want to create a stigma, but at the same time, you need to be able to get them to their services that they need, and whatever we can develop. So I'm just kind of curious about that.
I had 2 very specific questions that I had written down from last week, but I figured to left my notebook, so I'll email them to you. But they were all along the lines of the 2 areas that I had further questioning on, specifically was RTI. And that's because I've experienced that. I know there's a lot of conversation around over-reporting students and under-reporting students, but I personally know that RTI has been utilized to under-report students in order to keep them from being labeled as a special ed student and not being given an IEP. And I know at the time it was an incomplete RTI program. It wasn't full utilized appropriately. And so I would like to know how that's being done in our schools now, and if we are doing the full RTI the way it was designed to be implemented. And then I had another question around some of the numbers that Pam gave last week, and I'll email you more specifics, but it was around if we have too many teachers or not enough, too many special ed staff or not enough special ed staff. And I would just like to know, do we need more ed techs and fewer special ed teachers? Do we need more special ed teachers and fewer ed techs? Like, how are our numbers just off the way we have it, and do we need to adjust what we have? So I'd like to look at that a little bit further. And then following up on the last couple comments, I know when I was a student in Lewiston schools, the special ed kids were not integrated into the classrooms. We had special ed classrooms, which ultimately became resource rooms. And it was very much an us versus them, or that special ed students were treated differently. And I think that ostracized them in a lot of ways. And so now I think we've gone way in the other direction in an effort to keep kids in the classroom and to keep them with their peers and to keep some level of normalcy for all students. I think maybe we've gone a little bit too far, and now we're keeping kids in the classroom more than they should be, or without the proper supports while they're in the classroom. So I like the comments that Ms. Whitlow made. I think that we need to look at that a little bit more also. Just, Ms. Hawkins.
I'll be really quick. It's just an observation from my time driving school bus. Put them in their own classroom, put them in the classroom with the rest of the kids. The kids know who's who. They know what the issues are. The issue in my district was kids who needed to be on separate transportation were thrown into a bus with everybody else. And I got it straightened out on my bus, but I know there are issues across the district. There's a point where they can be together, but there is a point where they need to be separate. And we need to find where that balance is, because from the sounds of things, we've gone a little bit too far in one direction from being way too far in the other direction to start with. I know we've got a lot of work to do. I know we had this audit, which I don't like calling an audit because it was not what I was thinking an audit was going to be. I will happily have a conversation about a redo or update or something when we're ready to do that. Because I'd like to see something much more comprehensive and much more clear for what we actually need to do. I think a lot of what I'm hearing here tonight is, what do we need to do? What are we actually looking at? So that's my 5 cents.
Mr. Driscoll.
I just want to make sure that everyone is keeping in mind in this conversation that some students who are in need of special ed resources have really active and engaged parents who are capable of advocating for them. They're the kind of folks that we all hear from and that we're glad to hear from, and that inform our thinking about this issue. But I also want to make sure that everyone is keeping in mind that there are whole populations in Lewiston where parents are not in a position to be those kind of advocates for their students. They may not even be aware of what special education is, what their rights are. And I just think that as we approach this issue going forward, and there's obviously a tremendous amount to do, we need to make sure that we are not only responding to the folks who are raising their voices, who deserve a response, who need a response, but also making sure that we're getting the resources to the kids who don't know that they need it and their parents don't know that they need it, but they still need it. And I think that is one of the biggest issues in special ed in Lewiston is student populations who aren't even being identified for the services, and they don't have anyone advocating for them. So in these conversations, I think it's important that we try to address that as well.
And I know I had a meeting with the superintendent privately, and we talked about almost setting up a family support group for those kind of things, to where people can understand what's going on, know their rights, know what's going on. How do you, if you disagree, how do you what's the next appropriate steps to go after that? So that has definitely been brought up. As far as the IEP audit goes, I almost like to see if we can almost do, I hate this word, but it's almost like we should almost do a special ed task force, where we reach out to some of our community partners, reach out to some of our people who actually do special ed in Maine, and maybe demographics that are similar to us, places like Portland, and almost like say, just say, see what some of the stuff that we need, see what we go through. I struggle with an outside, entity that knows nothing about Maine, knows nothing about what we do here in Lewiston, our demographic. And I mean, and I know they said that the former superintendent, he picked the towns, but I mean, I struggle with something. You're trying to compare us to Waltham, Massachusetts, I believe was the town. It was one of those towns. And I just already found it difficult. So I would suggest that we have an IEP task force, a special ed task force that really digs down and does some really looking at kind of what we do and what our shortcomings are. And that's what would be my suggestion.
So the disability categories, we have like autism, emotional disturbance, these are all categories for the IEP, is that correct, what we were looking at, like the IEP? Like what, so it says disability categories on the slide that we were given, and we have autism spectrum, emotional disturbance, speech and language impairment, these are all on the IEP, what's checked off on that, correct? So one of the big things that I think we need to focus on is, if you'll notice, it says specific learning disability. We have 244 students, which is the largest category of all of these things that are categorized as specific learning disability. Could you tell me what that means? What do they have for specific learning disability? No idea. Can anybody here tell me what that child would have? That I think needs to be updated, because that's not telling us anything. And yes, as you dig into the IEP, you'll find things, but I don't think that you should have to read through all of that to figure out what that means. So I think when you label kids who have been diagnosed, it should be very clear in an IEP front page what the disability is.
Mr. Madris-Collins.
I think Member Whitlow's point makes an excellent amount of sense. It's hard to evaluate any of this stuff if you don't know the details of the cases. But I also think that what Member Physics said is really worth pursuing, and I think that we should pursue it right now. I think that this committee should create a special education task force. And if Member Physics is willing to lead it, I would suggest that he should lead it. So I would make a motion to suspend the rules to consider the creation of a special education task force.
Second, so we got discussion.
Any discussion?
I'm pretty sure we weren't adding any discussions to this agenda because we voted last.
So
It's my understanding that we voted.
you can make a suspension to any agenda if you do it in this procedural way. If it doesn't pass, then we don't talk about it, but.
Any discussion on suspending rules?
And this would be to specifically create a task force.
Yeah.
And was it your intention that it be a committee task force or a general task force?
I think it would be a general task force, and I don't want to get too much into the weeds now, but I would almost.
I think the discussion right now is just on whether or not we're going to suspend the rules. And then if we do suspend the rules, then we'll have a discussion on the task
I guess it feeds
force.
into my discussion on, go ahead. Good.
Mr. Madris-Collins.
I'll keep this brief. I think this is an important issue. I think that we need to be taking action on it. And I hope that the committee will allow us to have a robust discussion about the possibility of creating a task force.
Any other discussion?
I will say hopefully robust and brief.
I meant to say at the start, I don't know if we can do this as if it's a continuation of last week's meeting or if we should start at the next meeting.
The rotating.
Yes, I believe it was Mr. Beauplan that brought up at our retreat, the possibility of doing a rotating roll call vote instead of always starting with Ward 1. So I meant to make an announcement, and I didn't, that we would be doing an alternating roll call vote moving forward, beginning with Ward 1 on the first week and then rotating the way that City Council does. I know there's a name for that I'm not thinking of right now, but so I wanted to say that now before we do our first vote. But seeing that the representative from Ward 1 is not, he hasn't done this meeting yet, we'll start with Ward 2.
Yeah.
3,
Yes.
4,
No.
5,
Yes.
6,
Yes.
7,
Yes.
city council?
No,
So motion passes 5-3.
Mr. Majerus Collins?
Okay, so with that in mind, I will make a motion to create a special education task force and to appoint member Physic as the chair of that task force.
Well, I just have I have a question before we move forward. Do we have to pass the suspending of the rules with a 2/3 vote, and would that have consisted of
Yes,
a
it's a
2/3?
2/3 vote.
I would make a point of order that a motion is now on the table, so it's out
She
of
started
order.
saying it before.
It's out of order to discuss something else.
Yes, it requires a 2/3 vote, and there's 8 of us present.
So it'd be 5.
Does anybody know what
Yes.
2/3 means?
Yes.
Just
Okay, I just want to
6%.
make sure. Okay, I just want to make sure. I wasn't questioning, I was just questioning the actual percentage and how many votes were actually needed.
2/3 vote, 66%, 5 out of 8 is 67%.
So there's a motion on the table for possible consideration in a second.
Second.
Thank you.
Further discussion? Mr. Majerus Collins?
This is a really complicated issue. It's a really important issue, and it deserves intense attention from a dedicated task force of interested school committee members and also community partners, experts, and anyone else that can be brought to bear on it. I was underwhelmed, as I think some other members of this committee were, by the audit that we received, and I think that member Physic's suggestion is a more fruitful way to pursue this issue.
Ms. Wright?
member Physic, is this your intent?
So, asked me, so, yeah, I didn't come here today to go, hey, I want to start a task force and be like the co-chair of it. And,
But here we are.
but obviously I'm pretty passionate about special ed and pretty passionate about making our school system better. And I think cleaning special ed would do that. One thing I would is recruit some of the people who work on the poverty committee and get some of their input and put together a good team. Just because I'm in charge of it, that wouldn't mean I would just be more of the organization of trying to put those things together. So I would definitely reach out to people who are probably, a lot smarter than me, and to do some of that well-needed work. And I would work with the district as well to do some of that well-needed work. Again, chair just more of the kind of the organizing part of it and that thing of it. But I think there's some bright people, some bright special ed teachers in our community. There's some bright people in our state that I think we can tap into that hopefully be willing to kind of help us out. So I think we can really dive deep and hopefully come up with some solutions and almost to repeat some of the poverty committee's work. I mean, it was very impressive of where they were, what they're doing to fix it, and how to see how they fix things. And so I would hope that this is not being tossed down the district's throat, and I would hope we would have their full support, because it's not necessarily nuts for a stem. It's just saying, hey, we want to lend a hand and do everything we can to do that, because running a district is some serious work, and now nationally you have our president trying to get everyone back in school. So we all got to approach this with a community working together approach, and so I think we could do some of that work.
If I might continue.
Madam Chair, if I may.
Yes, please.
So we actually don't have a 2/3 vote to do. I think this is worthy work and conversation. I just want to make it known to the committee that it's not 2/3.
Point of order that once the motion's on the table, it's out of order to object based on the results of the vote. So the motion is on the table and it has to be considered.
So I don't want to start a procedural war.
Yeah.
We definitely, if we can get this, if for some reason, if we can get this on the agenda for February 22nd, I don't want to hold up the meeting with a bunch of procedural stuff. I would just hope that we can get this on the February 22nd meeting.
A discussion, we'll get what on the.
This discussion, if we're not, or if this is going to be pulled off the table, I don't want to get a procedural war. I don't want to start that. But I just would ask that maybe we at least get on the February 22nd meeting for this agenda for discussion.
If we can have a recall of the vote. I mean, we can finish the discussion, we can vote on it, and then we can have a recall of the vote, and it'll erase
Okay,
everything, or we can just.
I just show up. I'm not really.
Madam Chair, may I continue?
Yes, please.
Okay. Either way, I mean, I think this is a worthy discussion, and my hope was that since the superintendent was taking notes and taking this under consideration and taking it back to the director, that this would come out of this discussion anyways, and it would be presented by the district itself. While I admire how passionate school committee members are about this topic, I think we do have to let some of the experts inform us a little bit more. I will say I mean, maybe the director is here, but it would be helpful to hear what the next steps are going forward so that member Physic, member Majerus-Collins would be assured that this is coming back to us in a structured way.
Mr. Majerus-Collins.
My concern is that this committee voted to have an audit because we thought there was something wrong. I think that's a sentiment shared across a wide swath of the committee. I think that many committee members, myself included, found the audit to be underwhelming and not particularly illuminating. And I think that, but I think that the original impetus to bring in outside eyes on this issue is necessary. If everything was working well, we wouldn't be having this conversation in the first place. So it's not to say that the district's input is not incredibly important, but I think that the whole reason we're having this conversation is because this committee felt it was necessary to spend public money to conduct an audit because there was something wrong. And so, you know, that audit may or may not have been what we were hoping it would be, but that doesn't change the underlying circumstances that we need outside eyes looking at this.
Ms. Wright.
In my history on the committee, I think this is the most frank conversation we've had about special education, and I would just give the district leadership a chance to come forward with their part of the conversation. I think our superintendent has been in their role for not a huge amount of time yet, even though they're very experienced in Lewiston, and so I do think I would just caution folks to take a look at our boundaries and say, this has been a really open conversation. Lots of feedback has been taken in, and maybe we should see what comes out of that. I think now that the idea that a task force is out there, it would be surprising if that wasn't part of the recommendations moving forward, but I don't think we need to force it through a school committee though.
So are we gutting the vote or are we voting
No.
on this?
So procedurally, Mr. Majerus-Collins would like to continue with it, and then if Member Whitlow wants a recall of it, then we can go through, we'll just go through the procedural steps, vacating it and starting over again and go from there.
So yes.
So I don't want to be made to be the bad guy. I just, I don't want to be shut down when I have something to say. I'm having a really hard time with this dynamic, and as a board member, as a part of this board.
Sorry, point of privilege, can we wait until, sorry, I want to hear what you have to say. Thank you, Kira.
As a member of this whole unit, I feel like I want to be able to say stuff. I'm sorry that it might not be procedurally perfect and whatever, but give me the respect. I'll give you all respect. And I don't want to have to recall the vote because I don't want to be that person. So I'm just tired.
Ms. Hawkins.
I will say for myself, I'm tired of it as well. It seems like every time something new is brought up, it ends up coming through as setting aside of rules and all this rigmarole that becomes tiresome very quickly. And I don't understand why, if most of the people in this room like the idea, we have to, and I don't know what's driving the pushback on an idea that for the most part we seem to like. I don't know whether it's where the person is coming from or that it wasn't somebody else's idea or what. But this happens constantly. We like the idea of a task force. Why is it such an issue that a specific person seems to have brought it up and put it out there? Because that's what I'm seeing.
I don't think that it's a specific person. I think there's been a lot of focus on this committee about following procedural rules, and everything has to follow the procedural rules, and we're utilizing procedural rules, and we're doing this utilizing procedural rules. There's been a lot of that being thrown around. And then sometimes the procedural rules are being used appropriately, and other times they're not being used appropriately. And it seems really, depending on which way we want something to go, determines whether or not we follow the procedural rules. So I think that if we're going to have a huge focus on relying on procedural rules, and that's been beat to death in the last 12 months, that we should follow the procedural rules consistently and appropriately 100% of the time. Or if we're not going to follow them appropriately 100% of the time, then they shouldn't be utilized only when it benefits a specific vote. I think there should be consistency one way or the other.
Or significantly goes against a particular vote because certain people don't like it. I think
the
it's not-
procedural rules
it's
are
been
the
used both
procedural
ways.
rules, whether people like it or not. As long as we're following the procedural rules 100% of the time, then it's not one specific person or one-sided. It's relying on the rules as written. Ms. Wright.
Just to weigh in, I can't hear what happens half the time, so if you need me to weigh in on something, just tell me.
And if you need us to speak louder, please tell us. Mr. Majoris Collins.
Abiding by rules of parliamentary procedure is an important part of the deliberative process, especially on a board that does not always agree on what the right course of action is. But I will say that one of the reasons that we seem to find ourselves hung up on procedural questions so frequently is because of the chronic inability of this committee to vote on anything, to get things on the agenda, or to take a vote stemming from a discussion of something on the agenda. And I wrote a letter to the chair, to the superintendent, and copied the entire committee on it last week, explaining that everything would run much more smoothly if we had an understanding in the procedural rules that if an item is on the agenda, that we can consider courses of action stemming from that conversation. It seems crazy to me that we would have something on the agenda, have a conversation about it, but not be able to take any action without suspending the rules. And so if people would, it would not eliminate the use of suspending the rules, but if we could actually take actions stemming out of conversations on the agenda, it would make everything so much smoother. And it's not to say that any particular action would be adopted by the committee or not, but it would at least allow us to consider proposals stemming from conversations about issues that are on the agenda. So I would really, really recommend that the chair and that the committee as a whole, change how we're approaching this and allow for direct consideration of germane motions off of agenda items.
If I may, and I know that Chair Parks and I, we work through these every week that we have them coming out. And I think the challenge for us with transparency to the public, they should know what that vote or motion recommendation would be. And we don't have that oftentimes. So I think if those existed, because I really think it's important. The reason the agendas come out when they do is not just so that materials are in your hands, but so that the public can see them as well. And so we'd want to make sure that whatever procedural thing is decided, that we're giving the public a chance to understand what could be happening and procedurally have the information so that they can be prepared for whether or not they want to participate. And
I think along those same lines, as you said, Mr. Majoris Collins, suspending the rules to elaborate on an item that's on the agenda that does not have a vote attached, that is probably appropriate in most situations, but I think that the suspension of the rules has been abused actually to add things that are not on the agenda. So I think there's a difference in what has happened and what you're saying happens. I think those are two very separate subjects. Mr. Physick.
So I think we're going down a road that we went down a road. I think we started off with trying to approach this from an academic standpoint of trying to get something done, and I think we're going down a road that, frankly, I don't think we need to go down. So I would respectfully ask that that we take this off the table for now, and Mr. Majerus Collins and I meet with the superintendent sometime this week, and just so we can move on, and then maybe we can this can be on the next agenda or some other further discussion behind the scenes before we if we want to pursue this going down this road.
Mr. Majerus Collins.
I appreciate Member Physick's magnanimous suggestion. I think this is emblematic of why this committee has such a difficult time accomplishing things, because we have conversations, but we're not able to take any action. And it is enormously important that we be able to take action. If we inform the public that, hey, going forward, if there's an item on the agenda, we may take action on it. That's a reasonable public notice. And I would also point out that to the chair, frankly, the use of suspending the rules is entirely appropriate in all circumstances, but it's especially critical when we have a chair who won't put things on the agenda. So I don't really understand what the suggestion here would be, other than if the suggestion is that committee members should just, not bring their ideas forward. But every member of this committee was either elected or appointed to their office, and ought to have a right to have their proposals considered. This is just emblematic of where this committee is consistently falling short, because we take up these big issues and we can't even set up a task force because we have members objecting to consideration of that. So, with respect to Member Physick, I will, and with Member Potvin's agreement, I'll withdraw my motion, but it's frankly so disheartening that there are members of this committee who are so committed to doing nothing.
We're in a meeting right now that was not scheduled because last week you indicated that there were too many things on the agenda, and now you're indicating that the chair does not put anything on the agenda. So ending this discussion and moving forward, I would appreciate if the mudslinging would just stop, because it's too much. Do you agree to withdraw the second?
You're okay with bringing this back for a vote?
Yeah, the point of this discussion tonight was to find out what we needed as far as to piece out and have further discussions on. So it's very appropriate to add a task force to the list to have as a future discussion at our next meeting.
Withdrawn.
We're going to hear from members of the public on this special ed issue.
There's no hands raised yet, but yes. Are there any attendees or members of the public online that would like to speak? I don't see any. Are there any further discussion on the special ed subject, more questions or conversations that should be put on future agendas? Ms. Ray.
I would just like to ask the superintendent where the timeline you envision from this moment forward.
There's a lot of things that have been asked for clarification here. Some of them are very big. And by big, I mean there's preferences, I think, that were shared in some of the questions, and I took copious notes over it. There are some things too that we have to get clarified by process. The forms that are used, the process that's used, are connected to state law and findings and proceedings. And so while there may be some preferences, I guess I have to explore within the law, within the expected documentation, could we do those things differently and still be compliant with law? And so some of those things are things that we can dig at. There are other things that I think are much lighter that we can get you answers on, at least say why we do things this way. And then I think, the idea of having a group of people that are going to continue to gather information and do this work is something that's already set in motion. Assistant Superintendent Paquette and I have interviewed our own staff and talked to them and taken notes on their feedback and their responses to both the audit and their work experience. And so that was one round that we did a while back. We've got clarification through research internally, looking at different IEPs and looking at procedural rules that are established, that are supported by both case law and also findings from other due process findings and things of that nature. So I'm not trying to belabor the conversation. We can get you answers back, but I guess, in the line of thinking task force like, I think that that's the work that we're looking to do anyway. And so I'm happy to have the opportunity to do that work and continue to move forward. It's not a small puzzle. It's a big one. And I think that there's not just one area where there's concerns. I think it's quite broad. And as you know, a huge portion of our budget and a huge portion of people's emotions and connection to wanting their students to succeed. And so we're going to continue to work at this. And time frame wise, I'm going to get it back to you as soon as I can in the pieces that I can so that you have what you need for information to do the work you need to do.
Thank you. And member Damon has logged in. Did you have any discussion on the continuation of the special ed conversation from last week? Okay, thank you. Moving on to agenda item number 10, to receive information regarding the LPS Parent Family Survey. Assistant Superintendent Karen Paquette will present.
So I'm actually going to bring Sue Williams in to share some of the findings. As she's joining, I will just share with the committee. The teacher advisory group that works, that meets monthly. 2 or 3 meetings ago, one of the conversations we had was mid-year. We talked about surveying our families and our guardians about their experience with the first part of the school year. So Sue put together some questions. Jake and I both added and tweaked, and Allison and a few of the members of the advisory group took a look at those. The survey was sent out, and then the results of the survey have been shared with both our administration as well as the teacher advisory group. And I'm happy to say that the last meeting of the teacher advisory group, we actually pulled out some pieces of some next steps. And we have a few people working on some individual items that we're hoping will result in some families feeling more involved and more engaged. So Sue, do you want to just highlight what's in the slide presentation? Dave, is she able to share that on her screen?
I can give her permission to do that. I guess I want to test her audio.
So, did you want me to share it? Can you hear me, Dave?
Hold on, Sue.
Dave, is she able to share that on her
I
screen?
can give her permission to do that. I guess I want to test her audio.
So, did you want me to share?
Just a second, Sue, he's fixing your audio.
So can you try it now?
Can you say something?
Yes, can you hear me?
So you all should have received in your packet the results in a variety of formats. You should have received it the whole district and then by schools as well.
Try one more time, so.
Audio or sharing?
Okay, good, thank you.
Now share.
Okay, hang on.
There we go.
We're all good, so we can see everything now.
Okay. So hang on one second while I get my mouse where I need it to be. So as Karen said, you've all received copies of the results of the survey. And this really is just an attempt to sort of summarize some of the big themes that came out of it. I think any number of individuals could look at this and see additional themes or sub-themes, but this slideshow is just an attempt to present some of what we were able to see in the data, some of the conversations that we've had with TAG and others, and just give a sense of where we're at and what our next steps are. So as Karen said, it came out of a conversation with our teacher advisory group that, there's really another voice here that we need to hear about the experience in school this year. And that's the parent voice. So we came up with this 30 question survey. And the general themes that came from it were really a desire for more in-person connection, opportunities in in-person learning, which I don't think is a surprise for any of us, communication, again, and technology. So 3 pieces that I sort of pulled out to highlight here tonight. This is just some data on the administration. We administered it the 16th to the 28th. That's just a graphic showing you when people responded. You can see when there was a second sort of right arrow request that went out to folks. We did translate all the surveys. We had a machine translation disclaimer on it. It's a very long document or a very long survey to translate. We also advertised the opportunity to call for a free interpreter. Siad and Hawa were available to assist parents as needed. Families were asked to respond once for all their LPS students. So that's why if you look at the comments, if you're looking at the elementary comments, you'll hear some high school comments or middle school comments. We didn't want parents to have to fill it out 4 times if they had 4 children in 4 different schools. And this gives you sort of the numbers and, they're roughly proportionate to what you might expect. What's not proportionate is the number of responses from our multilingual families. 96% marked English as their first language and just 4% of the respondents. 618 respondents said that, English was not their first language. So just with 618, we know that we're at, a small number of our parents overall, but keep in mind they're families. So they may represent far more children than 618. And here's the percentages. The 72 and 20% is fairly roughly what we have, I think, in our cohorts right now. So that makeup is there. But we need to keep in mind that our multilingual families really aren't represented in this data, given the disparity between our English-speaking families and their responses and the number of responses they had. So first theme, more in-person learning and connection time is desired. When you look at the data, there was an I don't know category in there. So they were not calculated into the percentages that you see here. So if the percentages on this slide don't seem to match the percentages in the data that you have, it's because I removed the I don't know responses to get a true sense of where people who had a thought that they felt comfortable sharing or that they were able to share, where those percentages fell. So here's some relevant data points. 91% students look forward to coming to in-person school if that's their choice. And 40% of respondents across all cohorts, including cohort C, say that their child looks forward to that remote work. So remote work in general is kind of received with a little bit of a meh feeling from most families and students. So that there's extremes in that too. Some families are very pleased with what's their child's experience and how they are enjoying the remote work. 40% of the respondents disagreed or strongly disagreed that the activities on remote day represent meaningful learning or connection time. So that shows you that there's sort of mixed feelings about how we're able to sort of provide those activities and connection time for students on Wednesdays. Again, there's no judgment about the teachers or teaching or the way buildings are running this. It just gives us a sense of what the parent perspectives are based on their child's experience. So some more relevant data points. Their child almost never works directly live with his or her teacher online. That's almost 40%. And I put in parentheses here, that could be an engagement issue or it could be an opportunity issue. Do they have opportunity to engage live synchronously with their teacher? I think that depends on the building and the program. Or is it an engagement issue where the opportunity is there and students aren't taking advantage of that? We don't know from this data. And when asked what their child prefers for remote learning, live lessons and opportunities to interact with teachers and peers live online, you'll notice those were by far the highest percentage of what parents selected for what their students prefer for learning modes. And then the teacher created video lessons. So all of this, you can infer from this that students really want connections with those of us here in the school system that they know, the teachers, and especially their peers. Here's some relevant comments I won't read.
Pause this one
I'll
second.
give you a minute to read them.
Just 1 second.
Sure.
Am I missing something? Did we get a copy of these results? Because I'm not seeing it in the packet.
It's in the folder at the top.
It's in the folder on the top. Thanks.
And the results that you have, Ms. Medeiros-Collins, the results that you have are broken up by grade level. I'm gonna, I'll add to that. One look that I didn't think of till later was to disaggregate them by cohort, remote cohort C and AB, because you'll see some data points in this presentation that sort of help contrast the different experiences, but I can add those to the folder for you just in case you're curious. But here are some comments. I'll give you a minute to look at those. It just shows you how there's a variety of comments, but in general, people are looking for some of those connection times for their students. Some of the parents on the committee might recognize some of these sentiments as well, if they have students in school. So here's that contrast I was talking about a minute ago, talking about cohort A, B, and D versus cohort C. To the question 5, which is my child looks forward to doing his or her remote schoolwork on remote days, you can see the difference. Now, the turquoise and the orange are in the disagree or strongly disagree category versus cohort C. So you can see that parents seem to perceive the experience their children are having in cohort C from a remote standpoint. That's really all they know, but what they're saying is my student seems to be receiving this in a way that's a little bit different than maybe some of our ABD students are receiving it. And there could be a number of reasons for those. We haven't peeled that onion. I'm sure we could make a lot of inferences, but that's definitely something that is worth exploring, but it does show that difference in perception. And again, here, if state guidelines allow for LPS to offer more in-person instruction, I would like my child to attend in person. And you can see the big difference between those that are home with their children in remote settings right now or have their students in those remote settings versus those families who have chosen to send their students to school in a hybrid model. And that would make sense. This is the choice they've made to send their child to school. The next theme is about communication. And I guess for what we can look at the data and sort of, again, infer, and this is just one inference you can make in general from looking at the comments and the data, that direct communication is preferred by our families, from the district to them, and it's sometimes hit or miss. So 80% of respondents indicated that the amount of communication from schools or teachers was just right. They prefer direct communication methods. 54 to 80% of the time, email, phone calls, talking points, and texts were selected as the preferred method of communication, as opposed to mass communication, robocalls, social media, public forums. Those weren't mentioned a whole lot as helpful to families. I wanted to put this note here that communication was mentioned frequently. These questions were toward the end of the survey, as you can see, 21, 22, but communication was in every question. Parents mentioned communication on one level or another in the comments for nearly every question in the survey. And a range of perceptions on that, positive, neutral, and negative in those comments. And here are some of those relevant comments. Again, I would venture to say there were well over 1,000 comments, but I just tried to glean a few that showed a sort of a span of what people were thinking. So again, you can see it's hit or miss depending on your family's experience with the teacher or the school or the district. And these comments sort of give you that range of experience that families were sharing. Technology is working, our third theme. 88% of the respondents, agreed or strongly agreed that the school device is really working well for their child. About half of them, a little more than half, said they have not had an issue. And close to 80% of those who have agreed strongly that they're able to get timely help with the school issued device. And speaking with principals around different pieces of this, often that they'll bring that device right into the school and get help from staff there, either if not the tech person, then the teacher or the principal. They've really gone above and beyond to do what they can. Sometimes the fix is a simple one, and sometimes it involves a more technical issue. But it's all hands on deck. Anyone who can look at something that's not working for a student on their device, whether it's software or the device itself, and can help parents has been working in that arena to make it happen when these issues come up. 80% of families said that their child understands how to navigate the management system. So Seesaw or Google Classroom, students seem to be able to manage it. And when asked to indicate the assistance their child needs most often, technology issues were selected the least of all of the issues that parents have with their child connecting with school and engaging with school this year. It's nice to see that consistent internet access was one of the lower ones, because I know we've worked really hard as a district, and Dave's team has worked really hard to get those hotspots out and ensure that our families can connect. So additional themes. Hybrid and remote learning is challenging for students and families receiving special education services. That's not surprising. 41% of families agree that compared to past years of services my child receives for ELL, we put an asterisk near the ELL because remember, we don't have many multilingual families responding. And a number of our special education families are also multilingual families, that the services are meeting his or her needs. That is not a comment on what teachers are doing or what programs are doing. Special education services are a challenge to deliver in in-person settings for any number of reasons. And I think that the hybrid or remote learning has just sort of highlighted some of those challenges and made them even more difficult for families and students. A lot of therapy students receive our therapies that require in-person work with therapists and others, and sometimes that can impact families' perceptions. And of course, student engagement is a challenge for schools and families. So earlier when I mentioned on the last slide that technology was the lowest sort of in the concerns parents had, the highest concerns they had for their students are staying motivated to complete schoolwork. That was 70% of our families said that was it. It was by far the highest challenge that parents indicated. Additional themes. Teachers and LPS are doing the best they can with a challenging situation. There were a lot of comments in there saying, we know teachers are working as hard as they can. We know schools are working as hard as they can. The district is working as hard as it can. It's just challenging times. There were a lot of comments to that effect, and I didn't want to lose that here. The tag team noticed that too, and they were heartened by the fact that parents are seeing them and are seeing the efforts, even though the work is hard and the engagement is such a challenge. So here are some of those comments. And then there's some things that in hindsight, we wish we'd asked families. We didn't ask any questions about their perceptions of the social, emotional, or mental health of their student. That's a question that would probably have to be asked very carefully, but sort of how's your kid feeling about this? How are they coping? It would be nice to get some of that information from our families as to how in general, beyond just school and school engagement, how some of those issues are. So that would have been information nice to know. We're struggling right now to sort of identify and address the barriers to attendance and engagement. We have a good line on many of them, but others are so student and family specific. We'd be curious to know what families feel, what is holding it, what is most in the way of them being able to support their child. And I think that we're gaining that information now, mostly through conversations with the schools, with principals, attendance teams, teachers. So getting a sense of that data on a larger scale would have been nice. And then looking to the future, how do you think schools should look post-COVID? That could be a question we ask maybe on a survey as we sort of start to move out of this year. It might be interesting to think, to hear what families have learned from this experience that works for their child, works for them as a family, and what are some of those things that they'd like us to possibly hold on to or consider for the future. School is different, and I think we as a district have already acknowledged that we're going to need to look at those things and see if we've learned new ways to reach students that we might possibly incorporate into our work. Next steps, the management team has already looked at this. Several weeks ago we started. We've spent a couple of weeks now looking at what are some ideas that we can use to get kids into school more often now and safely. So those are pieces that we're looking at since that was such a strong theme. The family engagement coordinator is working right now with Allison Litton. So James Ford, Allison Litton, they've been working to sort of look at virtual family and parent support, possibly in the form of parent universities. The Oxford Hills District has done a really nice job sort of putting together guest speakers and other individuals to speak on topics of interest. But also, Allison brought the important point that it also provides a forum for parents to actually get together with other parents, even though it's virtually, and sort of think about a topic and share some of the concerns and burden of trying to motivate their child and move them through school in a pandemic. And consider ongoing source of feedback and information from families to help shape LPS. So we're looking at ways to bring them in, how to engage families, but also continuing to look toward the future. What have we learned this year? What information can help shape LPS for the better, even though our year has been really challenging? So there it is.
Thank you.
For questions?
Yes.
I was just going to add that when we looked at this data and started to pull it back out, there was also some movement in our community corresponding with me directly in their schools about what's the possibility to have students in the building rotating on Wednesdays. And so we've opened up that from a research. We're looking into a perspective. I've had a conversation with Allison about what does that mean for teachers? How do we make sure we strike a balance if we did that? What does that mean for transportation, sanitizing? What does that mean for lunches? What does that mean for kids and parents, and how do we rotate it? So we're doing that work now so that we can bring that to you in a comprehensive way. And I'm hopeful at our next school committee meeting, just for consideration. But again, we want to know the details of what that means for workload, our ability to maintain clean, safe spaces for our students, transportation, you name it, all of that. So that work is happening behind the scenes now, and I hope to come back to you at our next meeting with more information.
Hey, can I add something to that?
Sure.
The ideas that have been shared, as a management team, they're super creative, they're super outside the box, and they're super student centered. It's really exciting to think about the possibilities there and the hope that even just some of them could be implemented. So the management team has done a really good job. They have a line on their students, a line on their schools, and they're really thinking creatively. So more to come on that, as Jake said. Thanks, Jake.
Sue, this is Paul Beaublanc, Ward 7. Just like to commend you and your folks on doing a wonderful survey I've been a sociology teacher and have done my share of surveys, and this was very professionally presented. You seem to ask the right questions, and just a whole lot of kudos to you and your staff for doing a very good survey. As always, we can't count on the number coming in. You know, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. The larger the number, the more reliable it is. But I think you promoted some valuable points there, that things we need to work on and things that we're doing well and can improve on. So thank you very much.
That's right.
Thank you. I think engaging our multilingual families is an ongoing challenge across the work that we do in Lewiston. And that's something I think we need to keep on the forefront of nearly every conversation we have about the work we do here and the families we do it for and with.
That's right. Thank you so much, Sue, for that presentation. I think, you know, having evidence in numbers to give kudos to our tech team, knowing all the stops they pulled out to make this year happen in the way it's going. And I think it's wise that we're thinking about the future of LPS. The question I wrote down is, do we continue to offer remote for who that's working for? Because there's a population where it is, and I'm very curious to hear what that sounds like from folks. Do you have a sense of when you might do another family survey with those kind of 3 points that you didn't get a chance to ask at this point?
You know, we haven't had that conversation yet. I think that everyone just sort of agrees that this is one point in time. It's sort of just before mid-year, just after a challenging fall of adjusting for families. So we're acknowledging that we do need to hear from them again. We just haven't pinpointed that time. That's certainly something that bears further conversation to make sure that we collect the data at a time when it can be actionable for us and also relevant for families at that point in time.
Thank you.
I think it's important to note that the survey was done just before winter break or the holiday break. And we were strategic about that because we didn't want to get this false sense of, oh, we've been on vacation and now we're coming back. We also were in the middle of, I think at that time, there was at least 2 of our schools that were closed due to close contacts or the number of cases. So that data was coming from during the time that we were dealing with all of that fatigue for the middle of the year and all of that. So we appreciate families taking the time to fill it out just before the vacation, the holidays, and we do want to continue to get feedback and focusing on those other pieces, as well as checking in on how we're doing with, we don't want to get lax on some of these other things.
I know that Auburn just approved the alternating Wednesdays, and I know other school districts locally are discussing it. Does that have any impact on us as far as like sending schools or?
Yes and no. So the impact that we do have is Rob Callahan and his team at LRTC work closely with our 6 neighboring schools, including Lewiston, to make sure that their schedules are coordinated. So he has considerations there that he has to do. But as a matter of school committee policy, the plan that was adopted in August is the plan in place. And so anything I bring back, or for example, LRTC, they still are doing remote things on Wednesdays, regardless of what other school districts have adopted, because of the policy decision that this committee made to go with this hybrid model. So any next step that we would take, it would come back to all of you as a policy decision to make any changes in that schedule.
And I know that it's written somewhere that we're required to have a limited amount of days that are different from our neighboring districts. Is that playing a role depending on how many districts around us change to a different schedule than what we're operating on? I know we're already different from Lisbon, and now we're going to be different from Auburn. At what point does that have an impact on us?
So the dissimilar days language is really around the region. However, under the current emergency order, we still have the waiver for those days. We do work to try to make sure we're giving kids as many opportunities as they can, but we're not bound to that currently. That could change if the emergency order is lifted. And we keep our eyes on those. But right now, we're managing with the different schedules that exist. Some districts, when they don't have schools, still send their kids. And the days, of course, on Wednesdays when our buildings are not open, they're still not open. As that's the policy decision that was made by this committee.
Mr. Majerus-Collins?
I would also point out that my understanding is that remote days are still school days and would not cause any conflict with dissimilar scheduling or around the area. We are having students going to school and learning on Wednesdays. They're just not doing it in person, but the calendar has them going to school on Wednesdays. In terms of the survey, I appreciate the work that went into it, and the desire to have a meaningful and reflective picture of what our families are feeling. It's just obviously with the demographics, it's not remotely representative. And so I guess my question is, what do you expect us to do with this, given how wildly unrepresentative the sample is?
So I don't think there's any expectation other than we wanted you to be aware of the information that we received from our families.
Okay.
And that we, as a district, whenever we send out a survey, we take a look at who the respondents are, and hopefully we are responding to them and reaching out in ways to gather some of that information in other ways. Other than just letting you know what this information was, it was a collaborative effort, and just wanting to highlight and share with you and the public the information we had received.
Well, I appreciate that, and I understand how seriously the administration takes this. We wouldn't have heard the demographic breakdown if you didn't, but I do worry that this survey will translate into, in public discourse, a reflection of parents' opinions or families' opinions when it isn't. It's a reflection of a certain demographic. And so I just think in the course of this conversation, for members of the public, for members of the media, that it is tremendously important to understand that this survey, while the administration has done a tremendous amount of work on it, and I appreciate that, it is not reflective of our families. It just isn't.
Well, I think it's important to note that it's reflective of those families who did respond. And I think it's just like any input we receive, whether it's from staff or from students or from families, we have to use that information and move forward. So I appreciate the work, and thank you for listening.
Just real quickly, just also for those who might be watching or listening, these surveys were translated into how many languages, Sue? 6 languages? Is it?
6.
6 languages. Interpreters were available by phone and by other connections. It went out via social media on multiple platforms, direct email, direct text, and direct voice in our messaging system, on our announcements page on our website. Were there other platforms that it went out on? Email and talking points, I believe it went from teachers.
Yeah.
So it was,
Principals sent it out.
Mr. Poppin?
Jake, I had a couple interesting meetings this week that involved this survey and others. And, you can sense by the direction, the responses, the way it was going. But ultimately, it all circles back right to the one conversation, and that is, are we, as, you'll be able to do what you can do with what you have to work with right now. Ultimately, at least the people I talk to, they want their kids back full-time, period. I guess the question they're asking right now is, where are we if the governor were to change her mind tomorrow and put us green? How fast of a transition will it take for the Lewiston School Department to go back to full face-to-face learning?
so there's a couple layers to what you said. The first one is the color designation for the county does not change the guidelines for spacing, mask wearing, all of those things. So really what we would need is a shift in direction from the Department of Education, which does work closely with the governor, to say that these guidelines have been changed. And so green, yellow, or red we don't come to school, but green or yellow, it doesn't change our approach to the hybrid model because that's what keeps a population of our size within the guidelines to go to school in person. The Wednesday piece, we have some leeway there. We just have to make sure we do it the right way. But if the guidelines were changed, that's what would give us the opportunity to put more people in a building, essentially. It's really about our student enrollment being so large that we can only do chunks of it at a time. And that's why we rotate our cohorts. But in addition to that, we also have personnel considerations. We have a number of people, and I don't want to put Bobby on the spot, she might know a number or a rough estimate of people that qualify under the ADA Act and then the FSCRA language to work remotely. And so no matter what we do to toggle our schedules, we still have to be mindful of, do we have the staff in place on site that are protected or out of work, working remotely as appropriate to have all of those kids come back into our schools. And so that is not an easy one. We may have to look at, if guidelines are lifted, bring it back to this committee as to how we're going to approach some of the things that you all have granted in process, including people who are out of work, who we continue to compensate, who do what they can from home. If they continue to be home working remotely, there's a threshold for how many kids we can put back into school, even if all the guidelines are lifted. So there's a few things in play.
So I guess what they're asking is there something that could happen this year, or we can forget about this year ever coming back face to face?
I think it's
or is it a
possible.
30-day turnover? If the governor made a decision next week, and certainly we got CDC and federal DOE already chiming in. If state DOE finally chimes in and we change this, and we can do this, I know that there are considerations on transportation that have to be rerouted. Certainly agreements with the union that have to be agreed to bring the employees back to work. Certainly a vaccination situation. I mean, is it possible for a 30-day turnaround to do this, or can we just scratch it for the rest of the year?
I think in theory it's possible. The things that I'm seeing in the correspondence don't say that that's likely in the next 30 days. Even if the governor backs off of the emergency order, those guidelines for the Department of Education are kind of the laws that I have to answer to. And those guidelines, nothing that I have seen has led me to believe that they're going to shift those spacing requirements at any point this year. Now, I could be wrong, and everyone here knows my philosophy of in-person. I believe in it, if we can do it safely. I don't see the guidelines changing this school year, personally. I could be wrong tomorrow. And until those guidelines change fundamentally, we will not be able to return to school in person in full. But I do think we can look at the Wednesdays piece as a possibility, but we have some things we have to work out with them. But if everything was lifted, could we get back to work? It's gonna really come down to the adults that are available, who are able to be in work without compromising themselves and their qualifications. Bobby, the question I guess I have for you, and I'm sorry, this is totally on the spot. If you can't answer it, I get it. About how many people do we have currently working remotely or on a continuation or on a continuation of leave because of their individual situations?
So I don't have the numbers off the top of my head. However, I just looked at the tracking sheet this morning. I'd like to, Jake, if you're okay with it and the school committee is good with it, present those, we can present those numbers at the end of this month on the 22nd. It's a lot. Per building, there's quite a few that are in a remote capacity.
So I guess to follow up with that, if the guidelines were changed, if the emergency order was lifted, all of those things would have to come into play. We would also need federal language around protections to be lifted. And I don't know that we're going to see that this spring. I really don't think that we will.
Yeah, I won't touch it. All right, I'm good.
So how are other districts doing it? Because they're under the same guidelines. Is it just because we have such a large student body? Is that the only reason we can't?
It's really about the size of the enrollment. And if you can spread out, and you have the adults to spread out and the space to spread out, then you can do things differently. And remember, it's not just in our buildings. Our buildings are actually reasonable in size as far as how we've done our cohorts. It's buses, right? So we can't fill a bus with students. And without being able to do that, you have to limit the runs you can do and the time it takes to make those runs. Our transportation department has fundamentally shifted their entire bus route to accommodate only so many kids on a bus per pass and per route. So again, I see 3 layers. The guidelines would have to be lifted, the emergency order would probably be connected to that, and we would also need different federal language around what it means to be able to work qualified remote. And then some policy pieces with the school committee to change our decision on how we're going to school and shift the way in which or not how we're going to fund those folks that are not available to be in person because of a doctor's note or qualifying factor.
Mr. Physick.
A question, a couple of comments. How close, ballpark, I know you can't nail it down, but how close are we really to, if we are going to do a Wednesday or decide not to do a Wednesday, when can we ballpark know that? What's that going to look like?
I could put something in front of you at our next meeting and start as early as March.
Okay.
There are some things that we have to figure out.
Yep.
And really what I need to figure out is, do we have the staff to do this the right way? Can we make sure our spaces are clean and safe? And what can we take off the plate of our teachers? Because they can't do both things on Wednesdays. So we're gonna have to alternate. I think we have the leeway in the language, but the state still wants us to have kids doing attendance every single day of the week, participating in activities. That's where I think we gotta pull something off the teachers' plate because they'll be in person. We can't add to their prep and what they gotta push out to kids who are not in school on that Wednesday. And that's why I think it's a local policy decision. It's kind of a big one. But we have to find a way to pull something off the plate for teachers.
Mr. Richard, sorry, Mr. Physick, go ahead.
One thing about the survey, my biggest takeaways was that TAG being used as a collaborative effort. I like to hear that teachers are working together with administration and district level to work together. Obviously, I know there's always has to be some sort of oversight, but to hear that there's unity and working together to navigate us through these troubled waters, it was great to hear. I hope to hear about that in the future. As far as, and also to hearing out of the box ideas, I'd be curious to hear what some of those ideas are, because I think we as a Duke school district in the last couple of years, 3 or 4 years or 5 or 6, whatever you want to call it, I think we've tried to, this is the way we've always done it. And I like to hear that we're trying to do everything possible to switch things up and really think creatively. As far as if we're still in the hybrid model next year, I know, I'm just going to bring up part of our discussion that we had. Would it be some sort of reality? I know there's so many moving pieces, but is it definitely possible just to put that on the table that having a morning shift and then kind of a afternoon shift to go to school to get kind of cohorts A and B going on the same day?
So that's one of the ideas that has been floated. Logistically, we have to transport kids home and get the other group of kids in. Could that be done in the same route? There's some students stepping off, some students stepping on. It's really going to be dependent upon the guidelines and for what's allowable. The AM PM piece, I think we also need more input from teachers and what that is for work for them, and also our parents, because having kids at school every day for a piece of the day might be useful instructionally to have that in-person contact. But I don't know if parents have a plan for what to do at 11 o'clock on the days that their kids are dismissed at that time, or until whatever o'clock that kids would then go to school. And so many hours in the day, we would have to be real thoughtful about how we do that. But it's definitely an idea to get that in-person contact each day.
I just have one last comment. I would hope that we would kind of keep a remote option open for people. I think it's, some people who have valued tremendously from it. And I think the middle school, Jenna Mates and her crew have done a great job with ELMS as far as that goes. And I would hope that I would like to see it in a remote option for middle school and high school to continue that base. And I know there's a lot of variables that you have to work with, and I would hope that the high school would be able to almost mimic the middle school where you have you're seeing a teacher. It's not asynchronous where the kids are in school and you're kind of doing the work on your own, but sort of like the middle school where you're actually, when everyone's remote, you're seeing a teacher every day and getting some of that piece. So, and again, I know you have a lot of moving pieces to work with, so.
Mr. Driscoll.
So I appreciate member physics sentiment about trying to get kids in every day with an AM and a PM, but I think it's important to remember that at the moment, buildings are sitting empty for at least 36 hours between cohorts. And the idea that we're going to be mixing those cohorts in the same day really undermines any of our cleaning protocols that we have in place. To a lesser extent, the Wednesdays do that as well, but that's a conversation evidently for another time. I also just think that it's important that we be as candid and clear-eyed about this as possible. It is a virtual certainty that we're not going to be able to go back to school in a full normal way until just about everybody's vaccinated. That's what it's going to take. And in an ideal world, perhaps everybody will be vaccinated before the end of this school year. But we don't know how things are going to turn out with that. And I have my doubts, but I think that it's just important that the public understand that vaccinations are the only way that we're going to get back to normal with this. It's the only path.
Ms. Ryder.
Just because it was asked of Chief Administrative Officer Avery earlier about ABA and the numbers of folks, I think it might also be helpful to understand the time frame for those folks. I know at my employer it's been kind of a semester basis, but knowing if there's a standard end date, or because I think we all thought my original end date was like way back in the summer and then got pushed out because there is only one way out, it sounds like at this point. So I'm just curious if there's a unified end date, how we're managing that going forward.
So we will definitely, I'll bring all of that information forward on the 22nd.
Any other comments, questions? Thank you, Sue.
Thank you.
Agenda item number 11, to receive an update regarding CRF CARES funds. Ms. McCabe will present.
All right, so can't remember when it was, a few months ago, I shared with you sort of a quick update, a check-in, and now that we have received further guidance on our funds, as well as we've had the opportunity to spend a considerable amount of our funds because we thought the end date was December 30th, and then we had extended much of our funds, much of those dates. I wanted to just share with the committee an update on where we're at and what our next steps will be. Let's see. All right, so just a brief overview to remind us all of how we got to where we were at. These funds are all secured through an application process. It's required that Jake attest to the proper use of the funds, as well as complying with all the health and safety guidelines. And the ultimate goal was to help mitigate the impact of the pandemic on schools, the operations of schools, the students and the staff safety and access to education. Part of that application process included a needs assessment. So we used recent surveys from staff, from parents, from families. So this wasn't just the one we did, but ones we had done in the spring as well as the framework and needs based on what teachers and what administrators said, as well as directors, so facilities, tech, curriculum instruction, all of us completed those needs assessments. So here's the allocations and expenditures, and so there's a lot of them. We have an adult ed COVID package. You can see that we have $0 remaining in those funds. The day programming COVID relief funds, those funds help support all of our community partners. And at the time that I put this presentation together for last week, we had about $13,000 left. The district COVID relief funds, you'll see we had about $495,000 remaining at the time. So this is the next one, that's the elementary and secondary school emergency relief funds. That's what we were referring to as CARES money. That we have about 1.8 million, and those funds go through the summer into next school year, the end of September. That was the original date. Then we had some COVID eventual funds. So those funds came to us last spring to help support our homeless youth. And we had a variety of projects going with also some additional donations. And at the time I put this together, which was about a week ago, 15,000. And then our district COVID relief funds, or CRF2, we have about $1.2 million remaining.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
What is the difference between the district COVID relief funds 1 and 2? Is that a time that they were dispersed?
Yes, so here, you'll see the original grant, so COVID relief funds 1, we were told we had those to spend from March to December, but those were allocated to us late summer. The CARES funds, which is the one at the bottom, we found out last spring that we had those funds available to us. And then the COVID Relief 2 funds, those we found out, those were available to us end of October, and we had until December 30th to spend them. So the difference is there were different pots of money, and they all came with different rules and things that we would spend those things on. So all of the funds except for what we had received, which was the CARES fund, which is what we received last spring, we were supposed to have all of those funds spent by December 30th. And what you notice is we could pay for things prior to the beginning of the school year, so back to the beginning of the pandemic. So if you're seeing March 1st, if we had purchased PPEs, for example, or technology, and we had used local funds, we then could instead use these funds to pay for those purchases instead. Does that make sense? Is that what you're trying to figure out, Megan?
I'm trying to figure out the dates. Like it says March of 2019, that should be March of 2020, correct?
Yes.
Yes. Sorry about that, yes.
And then on the 2022, it says the elementary and secondary, it goes until 2022. Should that be 2021?
No.
Nope.
It does go that long?
It is that long.
Okay.
The nice thing about the recent relief package from our perspective is we have time, not only to plan, but to implement and to follow through on things. For example, CRF2, they came in end of October, thereabouts. Yes, it can go back to March, but it came in October. We had a 10-day window to take the research that they needed to apply for the initial components, itemize things with quotes, and they had to be on site and in use by December 30th. So for example, there's no ventilation at Dingley. We could have used the money to put ventilation at Dingley, but when we talked to vendors, they said, no chance, that's in and in use by December 30th. So that came off the list. It was, okay, what's next? We had PPEs that we ordered. There were conversations I had with David and Bobby about, I'm gonna place this order for laptops, but I don't know if they're gonna be here by December. And Jake, I need you to sign this because if they're not here by December and the grant doesn't allow it, we're gonna have to pay for this massive purchase with local funds. So some of those timeframes became exhausted for all kinds of staff, all the way down to teachers who were putting in requests, building administrators, our district leadership, and our district office. These were some major undertakings. This COVID funding was a full-time job for everyone attached to it, on top of everything else. It really was pretty wild. But again, the nice thing about the most recent relief package, yes, there's some dollars there, but we have the time to look at how we effectively use it. We are looking at kind of two main veins for that currently.
My presentation.
Oh, sorry, go.
So you'll see that that was extended through June. So what that meant was we had all these things like purchased, and we had already told the state, these are the funds that we're not going to be able to spend because we can't get these projects done in time. The materials won't be in, and the rule was they had to be in use by December 30th. So when they changed that rule and extended it through the end of the school year, they said, irregardless of what you said you were going to, give us back, that you weren't going to spend, you now can complete those projects, which is why you see the amount of money that we have remaining in that amount remaining column. So I got lots of pictures to show you what we spent our money on, so that you weren't just looking at my words. We broke this up. I broke this up into the different parts in which we had to put our funds into, the buckets that we had to put our money into. So the first bucket was the physical health and safety considerations. So school building ventilation systems upgrades. These are, thanks to Josh and his team, these are three items, three pictures that show what we've done. The high school has those big, I don't even know what they're called, things in the cafeteria that help with the ventilation. The middle picture is Longley, and then the other picture is of the high school.
Did LRTC help with any of installations,
No.
They
They did not.
didn't, were they not allowed to, or just?
It's really about a timing sequence. LRTC, of course, they have their instructional model, and they want to make sure the kids understand it, not just be about production, but.
Again, in a year.
And they had, first semester, they had their year 2 kids, and they were trying to get them to their accreditations and their assessments.
Right.
So.
No, you're good. You're not gonna hear me talking now because there's so much information. Cleaning equipment and materials to meet enhanced sanitation requirements. Again, Josh found me lots of pictures of the additional cleaning equipment that we have around the district. We purchased washers and dryers to ensure sanitation. So I believe all of our schools, if not most of our schools, received washers and dryers to help with the cleaning of different things. We have these water bottle filling stations instead of just the push button drinking fountain. Bubbler was the word I was looking for. That thing on the right that looks like a refrigerator, that's actually a UV book sanitizer. All of our libraries were able to purchase, we were able to purchase one of those for all of our libraries. And that helps with getting the books back in circulation. Again, additional PPE for schools. We also were able to provide storage, these Connex boxes. You see them in the parking lots and around buildings to store the PPE as well as additional furniture that needed to be removed from buildings. We purchased some tents and some shelters for outdoor learning spaces. The picture on the left is an awning that we had installed at Farwell. And actually there's I believe 2 or 3 of those that were installed, and they're really easy to crank out and allow for teachers and students to work outside. We purchased additional 2-way radios to help with communication, whether it's inside the building or outside the building, as well as we did some repairs and enhancements to the entry entryways of our buildings, including putting those footprints on the ground or the stickers on the ground to show where you needed to, where they need to stand for social distancing. Ron, I think you're gonna like this one. This is the modulars, the decking around and the stairs around those spaces were not safe. And in order to use those spaces to allow for social distancing, we are able to provide funds to complete those. We also were able to provide some professional learning around online security and protection. So some of Dave's team was able to participate in that, and I believe they're still in that work now. The second bucket is the social, emotional, behavioral, and mental health considerations. We had several teams from across the district attend ruler training. And really it's a school-wide approach to promote the development of these 5 key emotion skills. So teams did that, brought that information back, and have been working on implementing those pieces to help support bringing students back. It's also great practice to use when we're not in a pandemic. We provided some off-duty pay for staff who engage in SEL learning days. Some of that included in the building work, some of that included book studies. It wasn't all staff, it was staff that chose to participate in that. We also implemented a student survey to help receive or engage students in providing us information about their social emotional well-being and needs. We also had some additional things going on. This is all Aisha's work that she's been working on, an app for staff, as well as some book studies that we were able to provide materials for. The academic programs and student learning considerations, we had staff and materials for summer programming across the district for last summer. We also were able to purchase some of the learning platforms that we are using to provide the in-person and remote learning with those great devices that we have. So some of those that we're using, Edgenuity, GoToScience, iExcel, NewsELA, and there's several others, RazKids. Again, more about academic programs, staff pay to support remote learning labs. That's for students to access beyond the school day for support with schoolwork and technology and other needs, just to have staff available. The day programming costs fall under this big bucket, and then tutoring costs for students with specific needs related to success in remote settings. So we had some, specifically at the middle school, we had a few staff that were available to help students who were working remotely. Professional learning opportunities for our educators. These either happen over the summer or they happen at the very beginning of school. This Global Online Academy offered a couple different sessions that were really great about teaching in an online environment, and then also the Google Educator and those exams that went to that. Again, books, these are no pictures, so this is boring. Books for book studies, and then we also paid some staff, especially our tech staff, to help with getting staff up to speed. And there's a link here in this website, in this slide, to our professional learning website, where we try to put all of those pieces for staff. The next bucket is common expectations for hybrid and remote learning. Here are some things that Dave and his team have helped secure and get going. Devices, document cameras, TVs for synchronous instruction, projectors and monitors. You'll see the setup there on the table. That's a typical setup. The only thing missing is the document camera, which I don't think we had at the time when we took the picture. Additional instructional materials. The middle picture is from the Farwell cafeteria, I believe it is, and that was one delivery of books to help support classrooms and students at home. Again, additional instructional materials. Just some pictures from the high school, additional textbooks. We needed more copies so kids could have one at home or they weren't sharing. We purchased some additional library books so that we could continue to support a curbside pickup for our library elementary program. We paid for those online learning platforms that Sue was talking about, kids needing to navigate and feel comfortable with. Seesaw, which is our elementary platform, and then Talking Points, which is our newest probably addition. This is more of an additional way to connect with families. And it allows for families to respond and get the messages in the language that they prefer. So some additional considerations, and this was the last part. All of our nutrition program supplies are part of this. Vans for remote meal site support, laptops and other technology for those folks. Holding cabinets and coolers for transporting food. Again, more canopies and food packing line system to help with that process of feeding our students. So here's the adult ed program pieces. They shared with me several pictures about to highlight what they were able to purchase. The picture in the middle with the teacher standing up with that elevated desk, they purchased the teachers those spaces to make them more comfortable to do the remote teaching. LRTC, they did some amazing things with the funds that they were able to secure. They created a year-round outdoor learning space to support the needs due to COVID. And Jake, you can probably help me better. I think this one over here on the left is the outdoor plumbing, underground plumbing.
They call it, I believe, the sandbox, but anything you do subgrade on a construction site, the kids need to practice so that they can be prepared when they go to work. And so houses now with plumbing that goes down and through foundation floors or commercial projects, Bruce does this stuff all the time, but we never had the opportunity to show kids what it was like to do things subgrade. So this is literally a sandbox that's designed so that in the construction class, they can dig footings and prepare a site for a post or for a foundation. Plumbing can drop in rough outs that would be there before floors planned and what have you. So that's what that first piece is. If you look behind them in the snow, there's those posts sticking up. For many years, I know I go back many years talking about this with Director Callahan, probably over a decade. We should be able to, with the trades that we have and the excellent staff that we have, we should be able to build a house on site and work with Habitat for Humanity or community concepts and build something that can be moved in place. And so those posts that are in the back are set to hold girders or beams to build a house on. And so for the first time ever at LRTC, to my knowledge, we will be able to engage all of our trades in outdoor workspace that is going to help the family. And so that's part of that work and that connection.
And I would say the state was very excited about that one project in particular because we're taking all of our trades outside, right? We were saying, okay, you've got to go outside to do this because that's where the house is. And then the last picture on the right is, of course, our wonderful culinary arts program. And I believe that is that in with food truck? Is that picture from within the food truck?
It looks like it.
Looks like it.
I think it is too. And they purchased, just like nutrition, they purchased some additional pieces to help support the serving of food. And they've been serving food to high school students and LRTC students for when they leave. So whether it's for lunch and dinner. So it's something in addition to nutrition.
I really like the idea of having the trades out working outside, because it's one thing to learn it in a lab, but most of the time you are going to be working outside in the winter in a lot of the trades. And if you don't learn early how to properly dress and prepare for it, you can lose a job. You know, showing up in shorts and a t-shirt because we're just working in the lab, that doesn't fly. And I think it's quite an opportunity for them. I'm glad we did it.
So another big purchase for our district, they all were really big purchases, but under this big bucket was a fleet of vans. So you saw in my previous slide, nutrition received, was able to purchase a van for helping with delivery. Dave's team was able to purchase a van to help to deliver all of those devices and have a larger space than someone's trunk of their car. Facilities was able to purchase additional vans to make those trips back and forth between schools without needing to take larger vehicles. And then we also purchased 14 student vans, and each school will be allotted 1 and 2 vans, I believe, to help with hopefully with that engagement and getting kids to school. And if by some chance we have students who are ill or need transportation, we're able to transport students safely without keeping them in a building, waiting for a parent to be able to pick them up if they have a vehicle or don't have a vehicle. Really excited about these vans, really excited about the opportunity to be able to potentially provide transportation in a way that we haven't been able to before. I should also add that facilities was also able to purchase an additional box truck to help with the deliveries as well. I didn't have enough room on all of the slides to put all the pictures. So what's next? You saw all those remaining funds on that first slide. So with our COVID Relief Funds 1 and our day programming, we will continue to expand our day programming. So we're going to be able to support day programming through the end of the school year. It was supposed to end in December. We're now able to continue that through the end of the school year with our partners. And we're actually able to expand that. We've brought on 2 new partners. So we have some amazing opportunities for our kids with the partnerships that we've created on those days we're not at school. Our ESERF 1, or what we would call our CARES money, though that was the grant that goes until next September that Megan asked about. So we'll just continue to use those funds to pay for those approved projects. Many of the projects in that grant include some of our temporary staff. It includes the additional subs that we're paying for. The McKinney-Vento, COVID McKinney-Vento grant, we continue to purchase basic needs items for our students. Along with some donations, we've been able to provide some cell phones, prepaid cell phones for our families that find themselves in a hopeless situation to help with the communication. CRF2, that was the largest pot of money that we've had remaining, and we're going to carry out the approved projects, as I said. A lot of those projects we weren't able to finish, but we couldn't meet the deadline. So we're looking at those projects, and then if there's any funds that we know we're just not going to be able to spend, or we have over budgeted for, we've been talking with facilities and with the tech department in particular to determine what it is we need to spend those funds with. The next pot of money that's coming is the ESERF 2 funds, and you'll see our allocation there, $9 million. You want to talk about the 2? Now, since I cut you off.
No, you're fine. I guess that, what I need you to know is that we're planning diligently around that. The nice thing about this one is we actually have time, so it's not what could be done by December 30th, and do that one instead of not this one, so we can be much more deliberate. The concern around space remains, and so we're trying to be creative with how we think about that. But really talking about our most vulnerable kids, and you're going to hear a lot of this when we do budget work, but our most vulnerable kids who have missed school, who have had limited access for various reasons, how do we make sure that we continue to support them? What can we do facilities and infrastructure-wise that is a need now that aligns to the funds that might position us well for a decade or for 20 years? And so we're looking at the different allowable items in those areas so that we can be strategic. So we really want to be smart with this money, infrastructure-wise. Again, there's a lot of rules around how you can spend the funds, what's allowable, what is not. There's some things that I'd like to do that the state may say that that's not going to be allowable. We'll do our very best to make sure that we continue to maintain our spaces so that kids can continue to come to school and look at what the different potential items are. As that information starts to come back to me in a full cycle, I'll make sure that I keep you apprised of some of the things that we're thinking and go from there. The nice thing right now, as I said, is we don't have to decide today. We actually have through until, as you can see on the screen, on the slide of the care meeting, September 2023 to do whatever we're going to do with these funds and make sure we have safe environments for our kids and also be as smart as we can for long-lasting things that we invest in. That's the work that we do.
Would these funds be used for supplementing teacher, exec, substitute pay, things like that?
Yep.
They can be used for that, okay.
And that's one of the things we look at, especially that most vulnerable component of how we continue to support our kids and looking at the recognition of what teachers do and our staff do. So that's all part of the conversation for sure.
And I will just say, at the time when I was going to present this last week, the application had not been released. It has since been released, and so we can begin that work that Jake said in terms of plugging in what it is we're looking for and completing that needs assessment. I know we've had some conversations with administrators about thinking about pulling their leadership teams together again, their grade level teams together again, and to be thinking about how might we address that learning loss, what might we need to prepare to open schools, whether it's in person full or whether it's going back in the fall in a similar model to what we're in or any of the above, depending on what happens. So all that work is happening now, and that plan, we're kind of taking all ideas and putting them in a big spreadsheet, and then we'll continue to do that work process.
Any questions?
Chair Parks, could we take a 5-minute break?
Yes, unless anyone's opposed to taking a break. Okay, we will recess. I was just saying, we'll recess for 5 minutes. Did you say I'm good or?
Okay.
Okay, sorry. Agenda item number 12, to receive an update regarding teacher performance observation process. Superintendent Langley will present.
Yes, and Sue Williams is available as well as our chief ed coordinator. If need be.
Oh, I just did.
We shared in the packet just some data that was coming to us through January. Just want to anecdotally say that the observation processes are continuing. The steering committee met in the fall to make some changes to kind of lighten the load. Those were approved in August by all of you, I think on the 28th, don't quote me. And Sue did a lot of work around that. And that steering committee is representative of teachers and administrators, association and whatnot. And so since then, we have done some professional development with our administrative team around observations, knowing that certainly the climate has changed and things are a little different between the in-person and the remote. And we also have more calibration, essentially, activities coming up. Sue actually found a teacher that was willing to volunteer and have a lesson recorded so that administrators can observe that and do some activity or calibration of what did you see here and how would you score that, those kinds of things, to make sure that effort is ongoing. In the document that we shared, there's well over 400 observations that have been completed already thus far this year, and those will continue as the year progresses. Wanted to make sure you were aware of just some of that data to talk about that process because it is a unique year and we're trying to be mindful of that. We do have some obligations, if you will, around observations. If we pause them, then we will fall out of cycle with contracts and things in the CBA. If we pause them, we reduce our ability to have meaningful conversations with especially probationary teachers about the levels of growth and areas for potential growth with them, and to continue to do that work. Sue really did a lot of work earlier this year to help facilitate the process so that setting goals and things of that nature were almost pre-written and available if people chose to use them so that they didn't have to take on another burden of creating other items. The pre-written goals, if people chose to use them, were connected to online instruction and the tools you need to do teaching and learning. So it had come up in a prior meeting. I knew we could grab some data. I wanted to bring it back to you. And so that was what this sheet was about. And again, Sue or I can answer any questions that you may have.
Mr. Vogel.
Yeah, hi again, Paul Vogel on board 7. Sorry, I brought this up not because I had been contacted by any teacher in the area, but I am aware it's an area of concern that teachers are not experts in remote hybrid learning and neither are the administrators. So I did not get any complaints or concerns, but I just wanted some reassurance, shall we say, that teachers themselves were involved in the process, that the most valuable type would be collegial, totally recognizing the system, every 2 years probationary, you can't put a pause, it's important. So I was just hoping that to hear from you, Jake, and I'm certainly satisfied, maybe Sue can add to that understanding of the unique situation is, I don't want to say given the benefit of the doubt, but is understood and recognized, and any recommendations are under that.
Yeah, I think what I appreciate about the data that Sue break down, if you look at the bottom of the handout of the second half of that page, it shows probationary teachers and continuing contract teachers, and it breaks down what levels they were scored at. And so you can see level 3, which is effective, level 4, which is distinguished. For probationary teachers, those are 25% and 66% respectively. So those are the scores that people are being issued after these observations. And level 1, ineffective, for probationary teachers was 0.1%. And so it's not like people are getting hammered on their evaluations or their observations. It sounds like, from a data perspective, things are reflective of the work teachers are doing. We have asked administrators to be mindful of where we're at, kind of along the lines of good teaching is good teaching, and people will get there, but this is certainly a different time. And so the observations are continuing, and we're going to continue to calibrate our administrators to make sure that that's the approach that they're taking. One, to be flexible, and two, to familiarize yourself with what that platform is.
Thank you. I wanted reassurance and I have it. Thank you.
Mr. Majerus-Collins.
I think that Member Beaumont hit most of the points, but I just wanted to perhaps enthusiastically suggest that if there are any teachers who are attendees of this, who have a perspective to share, that I, for one, would be interested in hearing if there's anything about this that we need to know beyond what we've just heard.
Do not see any hands raised from the 5 people attending. Any other questions or comments? Oh, I do now see a hand raised.
Hi, Allison.
Hi, Allison Litton, LEA president. Just wanting to chime in, and sorry, I had to quiet my children real quick, so my hand was a little delayed. Keith Levesque and I, LEA vice president, did speak with Karen and Jake and Bobby in regards to this, and we're hoping to call the steering committee back together in the near future to review the information that Sue has brought forward, and just kind of do a temperature check and see if there's anything further that needs to be addressed.
Thank you. Let's see if any other hands pop up. All right, any other school board members?
So do you have anything to add anything, or are you good?
I just wanted to add, tomorrow we've done a lot of work with that consultant Rutherford around Mike Rutherford around effective feedback. There has actually been a lot of opportunity for individuals to engage in professional development and best practice around remote learning. And I think everyone is still learning. I've been a part of, alongside evaluators, a number of remote observations as well as in-person observations. And, I have every confidence that the observers are seeing what's happening, understanding the challenges that teachers are facing with student engagement. And from what I've seen, the examples of teaching that they've observed are really promoting good conversation about engagement, more from a, how do we engage students in this context, rather than what is this teacher not doing to engage students. So, I think it's a really good learning year so far. And as the scores show you, evaluators are really trying to encourage educators to rely on their best practices and engage in a lot of inquiry around what will work best in these environments. Tomorrow, we're doing a professional learning session with our entire evaluator team, where we will be watching a cohort C teacher teach a lesson and be debriefing on what practices impact student engagement beyond just the one professional standard that talks about student engagement. So we're really hoping for some good, rich conversation as an administrative team tomorrow. I'm really looking forward to that.
Agenda item number 13, to discuss and vote on the recommendation to add 1.5 unbudgeted payroll positions for Lewiston Public Schools. CAO Bobby Avery will present.
And as Bobby chimes in, I want to make sure that there's a full awareness, and Bobby and I talked about this again today. These are not new positions traditionally. These are positions that have been in the fund, been approved for years, existed underneath Bobby in the office. They were not filled, and then a decision was made last spring to hire someone using those funds. And so the ask is a little bit unique tonight, and Bobby will articulate it, and Stephanie's here as well to share that. But I just want to be clear that it's not new. This isn't just kind of out of nowhere. This is something that the funds were taken to be used elsewhere, and Bobby's looking to bring that back in a way that she is categorized.
Yeah, thank you, Jake. That really sums it up nicely. I'll give you a little bit of backstory as to why we're here tonight. As part of our audit, the Finance Committee as well as the full committee heard that the audit didn't go as smoothly as we would hope that it would, in part because we're down 2 positions in the payroll office, leaving our business manager, Stephanie, who's with us this evening. Thanks, Stephanie, for coming in, to do the payroll administrator position. And it's left our 1 payroll specialist to do the entire payroll for Lewiston Public Schools. So we can't operate in our payroll office with 1 person and having Stephanie do 2 different positions. And that's why we're here tonight, is to ask to fully fund our payroll administrator position, as well as we do have some funds still in the budget that can go towards the payroll specialist position. And that's all identified and outlined in the memo that was provided to you last week. Any questions?
Ms. Rand, I'd like to make a motion to support this proposal.
Second.
Any discussion?
Can I get a clarification, what position was created out of the 2 positions that were condensed or collapsed?
Yeah, the position, I may get the name wrong, but it's the Family and Community Coordinator, Engagement Coordinator.
Which really has very little to do with the business office.
Correct.
It was questionable at the time. I'll just say that.
Thank you.
Predates me as well.
Yes. I'm sorry. Mr. Pollak.
Bobby, the big ask from the audit was our ability to follow up on the grant funding and the turnaround with requests that we were getting and being able to put in the paperwork we needed to. Who's going to be out of these new positions? How's this going to work? Who's getting identified to be that point person that's going to make this process go streamlined?
So what will happen is Stephanie actually will be freed up. She won't have to do the payroll administrator position. So think of the payroll administrator as the supervisor. It's the person who's doing all of the compliance work, making sure that we tick and tie for payroll on a weekly basis, proofing all of the data entry. We've got Main State Retirement, like it's a monumental, and Stephanie, you can speak to this because you're the one doing the work. But it's shifting all of that to the right position. In part last year, the reason why those funds were repurposed in part is because we couldn't find somebody to fill that position, those 2 positions. There were just no qualified candidates. And so the decision at the time was to repurpose it for 1 year, knowing that we would have to fully fund it. But Stephanie, why don't you share your experiences?
So to be perfectly honest, it's tough. They're 2 full-time jobs. And as Bobby mentioned, it's supervising the 1 payroll person that's there, double checking what's been entered in. It's, preparing for the quarterly statements. We just went through a month of reconciling and to ensure that our W-2s were correct. So that was a month of time where I had a heavy workload on the payroll side, leaving me not as able to maintain all my business manager responsibilities. So yeah, there's a lot of administrative work to that payroll piece.
Yeah, so I know that when this was voted on to take this and allocate the funds to another position, I know Mr. Damon and I were both very against it. We voted against it, knowing how crucial of a position that this was. So my my question is, are we asking to raise the pay of this position so we can get higher quality people to apply, or keeping it as was?
No, we are asking. So as the memo states, we're asking to take this from a non-exempt position, which is an SM7, and raising that to an SME 13, which is an exempt position. And the salary recommendation, I had compared that to the state wages that the Maine School Management Salary and Benefit Annual Report provides. So I looked at all districts that reported to see how much they're paying their administrators or supervisors for payroll. And that's how I came up with a salary. The, I'm sorry, the payroll specialist is, we're not asking for a salary increase on that. We just would like to just fund it.
Mr. Monroe.
I'm glad to see this come forward. You know, I think that a lot of folks on the committee at the time were concerned about the two vacancies. The administration at the time told us that it's not going to be an issue. And in my recollection specifically, recommended against this exact course of action. I'm glad to see that under different leadership, we're seeing a different result here. And at the end of the day, we're going to end up with that crucially important position that we got out of these funds last year, and we're also going to end up with what we need in the financial side of things. So I'm really glad to see this, and I strongly encourage everyone to support it.
Again, Paul Vogel on board 7. I know how important a grant person is. We will be able to cover our needs for grants with the new positions, no matter who does it. I mean, we will have someone.
Yeah, I think as Stephanie said, the communication will improve because Stephanie's not doing other tasks that she would otherwise be doing, so she can have an eye on some of those things and those turnaround timelines. I'd also add that Bobby and I and Karen have had discussions about reviewing our processes to make sure we have protocols in place so that the things that popped up in the audit can get resolved and we can shrink those timeframes and not extending our line of credit, if you will, through the city.
I do want to say, in fairness, the bulk of that did not fall and does not fall in the finance office. So I just want to make sure that we're clear about that. The processes, Jake is absolutely correct. We have talked about shoring up those processes when it comes to grant reimbursements and cash flow, and we're working on that.
See no further discussion. Ward 1 and 2 are both absent right now, I think. Did Bruce get back on yet? No. No. Oh, is there any public comment actually before we go to vote? I do not see any. Ward 1 and 2 are absent. Ward 3?
Yes.
4?
Yes.
5?
Yes.
6?
Yes.
7?
Yes.
City Council?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank
Motion
you.
to approve the position passes 7-0.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Agenda item number 14, to receive subcommittee updates. First will be the Finance Committee, presented by Mr. Bobbin.
Finance Committee's been busy the last couple meetings. Of course, we did a pre-review of the audit that happened. Of course, what came of it was these 1.5 positions that were noted that I think the whole financial scheme is going to work a lot easier now that it's back to full staff. We began focusing on long-term range spending to get so that we don't have peaks and valleys, but rather we have a well planned out total budget over a course of several years. We began that with curriculum. Karen Parkett delivered a fantastic piece. It was developed in curriculum showing what the cost factor was to address the needs that, are coming from the various, whether it's state mandate or whether it's from the public or whether from the students or the teachers, that we're going to accomplish this and a reasonable timeline to be able to accomplish it. Especially, Ms. Whitlow's desire to see, the piece on dyslexia that was also in there and fully funded. And so that's the sort of thing we're going to be diving into, and all of the big line items, the big drivers that are going to be every year, the fluctuations have a lot of variables so that we have a good grasp, and we're just going to go right down the line of the 12 articles and continue to discuss that. Jake, I don't know if you independently wanted to go over the Hudson, the bus issue.
Sure. Our contract with Hudson, or STA, Student Transportation America, is the parent company, has submitted a proposal to us to extend our agreement. We've done some work internally to look at that. We're real comfortable with what they have proposed to us. We'll be bringing that to you on the 22nd to discuss in detail and seek your approval.
And on the agenda for next 2 weeks from now, we're going to be just doing a numbers review for the upcoming budget that's going to be presented to the budget as whole, the committee as whole. And we've asked Financial Officer Avery to take the action of the committee from the school committee that pushed the suggestion of examining the substitute pay and having that examined and come with a report, so that we can hammer out some fine details and understand what the implications of doing anything with those pay scales are, and then being able to report it back to full committee.
Next is Facilities Committee, presented by Bruce Damon.
Facilities Committee has no report.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Oh, yep.
Member Damon, I was just wondering the status of the climate study, I think it was called, that we referred to the facilities subcommittee, when that might come back to the full committee with recommendation.
Sorry, Ms. Ray, I didn't get the question.
Oh, so I couldn't even tell you when this happened, but a couple months ago, maybe, there was a climate resolution that was proposed. We referred it to the facilities subcommittee. I was just wondering when that might be taken up on the subcommittee and come back to us with recommendations.
It is on the list of items that we need to address. We have not really had an opportunity to pull the committee together because of a number of things. But that is something that's going to happen within the next month or so.
Thank you.
Mr. Cotton?
As a question, Bruce, is there any chance you can give a little, give us a little idea of how it went tonight before the planning board with the CIP?
And Bobby may disagree with me. I mean, we took some criticism from the planning board for they don't feel that we've done enough advanced planning and enough, say, stocking the shelves to have monies set aside for some of the projects. Having sat on the planning board and looked at those LCIPs for 11 years when I was there, the school department for many years never offered up anything. It was only in the last few years that we even got anything. There was some concern that we were asking for more than half of what they are allowed by the way the ordinance is written. They can only bond about $8 million unless they take a majority vote to exceed it, which they have done repeatedly. I guess, part of it has to do with the LMS boilers. I think there was some support, I guess, for the boilers. Oh, I think that that's going to be a push. Yet last year, we fought to only get $1.1 million, which was nowhere near enough to do what we needed to do. So it's going to be hard for us to build that stockpile when we're not getting support for, for doing the projects that we need to move forward on. So, but I think in general, they heard us out and it went okay.
Mr. Ramirez-Collins.
Vice Chair Damon, this is not a question, it's just a comment. I want to thank you for being such an enthusiastic advocate for us getting a reasonable share of the LCIP. I hope this committee will continue to insist that school projects get their due in this process. It is long past time that we do that, and I'm just grateful that you're there pushing it forward.
Thank you, Member Collins. I think the other thing that people seem to forget is that the school budget is, a significant piece of total city spending, and we should be getting our fair share of the LCIP. So we'll keep pushing for it.
Thank you. Curriculum Committee, Subcommittee, presented by Mr. Ramirez-Collins.
The Curriculum Subcommittee met in early January, and we began our systematic overview of Lewiston's curriculum. In January, we reviewed the pre-K to 6 curriculum, the elementary school curriculum. It was an informative experience for me, and I hope for Member Vopalant and Member Physic. I'm appreciative of all the folks in the district who are taking the time to help us through this. We were joined by some elementary school teachers who were able to give us some insight there. And then, of course, the Dingley folks who are helping us through this entire process. I'm grateful for that. We're also going to be meeting tomorrow is our monthly meeting for February, where we will be doing the same thing, but for the middle school.
Thank you. Policy Subcommittee, Ms. Gray.
Thank you. We met at the end of January and went a little out of order from our predetermined policy review, but worthy of our attention were our truancy policy documents and also revisiting a federal procurement manual to become part of our policy D. You'll remember that we've already adopted most of policy D, but this work is going to be really important for our nutrition program and its kind of health overall through the policies. These policies will be coming forward on February 22nd as first and final passage, which I think will be a new thing for the committee. I don't think I've seen it since I've been on, but we're just going to present it all at one time instead of doing a first and second reading, given that the truancy law is already in effect and we'd like our policy to be up to date with law. Similarly, federal regulations for nutrition, same sort of thing. So please do take a look at those documents when they come out before the meeting and send along any questions that you have. Thanks to nutrition staff and to all the staff who are joining us for that call, because I know it was an early one, at least for me. We do not yet have a February meeting date. Things are starting to get tricky as we had budget meetings coming up. So we'll do our best to kind of thread the needle there and keep moving forward.
Thank you. Negotiations Subcommittee, Ms. Whitlow.
I have nothing to share this time.
Thank you. And the Ad hoc Homeless Subcommittee, presented by Ms. Hawkins.
Work is ongoing. There's several things in the works that will come through eventually. It's just a matter of timing and how things are going to flesh out. The basement at Longley has gotten quite a clean out. I haven't seen it yet, but I'm excited because the walkthrough I did do was a little bit eye-opening. But we're all really excited with the direction things are going. I think it's going to be pretty impressive. Kieran has a comment.
Question, Member Hawkins, you had mentioned to me that we were moving the committee's terminology in a different direction, so just for future reports, we may want to make sure that
Jake, do you remember what we came up with? Because my brain is not coming up right now. in order to avoid stigma applied to a committee that's trying to do good work, we are changing what we're calling the Site at Longley. So
LPS Enrichment and Resource Center.
that way students can say, I'm going to the resource center and not have to worry about any judgments or pushback. And it really will be a resource center for all students, not just homeless students, which will help with that stigma.
Thank you. Agenda item number 15, report from City Council Representative, Ms. Ray.
Thank you. The city council actually did not meet last week because of the snow day, but we are meeting tomorrow night in workshop on 4 items. The first is an update on the temporary wellness shelter. The second is an update from the housing committee about some of the recommendations that they had around our homeless population and resources for them. The third item is coming from our library and the library board of trustees, where they'll be talking about eliminating the practice of collecting fines for overdue library items. And then finally, this is an interesting one. We will be looking at every city subcommittee that exists and evaluating if it's worthwhile to keep those open. I don't think no decisions will be made tomorrow night when we're in workshop. We rarely take up any items such as that, but it's going to be interesting to just see how far we're spreading folks, especially the citizens who serve on these things. So that will be an interesting conversation.
Yes.
So when the temporary wellness shelter presents, what is it that the city is looking for? Like, are they thinking about possibly funding something long term, or do you know? I don't.
I would say in the past, what those updates have looked like are when the temporary wellness shelter at the Armory existed, there was a lot more citizen interaction with it, and so there were quite a few updates about that kind of LPD and having the detail serving over there, that sort of thing. I assume this is just going to be an update. There's no supporting documents that were given to us at this time, but it's only for 20 minutes, so I assume it's just how's it going, and is this a case study? What do we need to answer to see if a long-term thing exists? Given that it's kind of butting right up against the housing committee and their recommendations, I imagine the two will kind of interplay.
Okay, interesting.
Thank you. Oh, Mr. Button.
So Alicia, let me ask you, as the council representative, and obviously you're our voice to the city council, are you in a comfortable position to be able to articulate our needs on CIP and to push us forward with that, understanding that, we, as Bruce said, with a majority of the budget, we're 50% of the assets of the city, and we're getting somewhere in the area of 10-20%. I guess what I'm asking is, are you comfortable in taking that and working? Because I already know there's several councilors that are expressing concern. Or do you feel it needs to be a group effort to try to talk with the city council?
Sure. So this will be my 4th year kind of trying to liaise between the two, and the approach I've always taken is if this committee expresses a group opinion, I bring that forward and I amplify it as much as I can to them. I also share my personal opinion as a counselor and school committee member, and then I also encourage you to reach out to your counterparts. Ward 3 always has an easy job when I'm on here because I get to hear it live and in action, but I would highly recommend that folks use that platform to connect across the wards. I think for the past 3 years, I would say the LCIP hasn't had as much direction and vision as I assume it's going to this year with the finance subcommittee in place and with more stable leadership, I would say. We were kind of in transition moments in the past couple experiences. So I will take that 3-pronged approach again and see how it goes. I will try to lobby other counselors, but I can't make a promise, I guess, if that's helpful.
Mr. Madras.
Member Ray, will the council will not be voting on any of those items that you just laid out tomorrow, right?
As you
Or-
referenced earlier in this meeting, anyone could try to suspend the rules. It is, council's practice has not been to do that.
Okay. So in that case, when would you expect a vote, provided that there is not a movement to do it sooner, on the library fines?
So that would be a policy that would be enacted in FY22, so starting July 1, 2021. I assume that would be factored in prior, I assume we would vote on that prior to this budget conversation happening.
Okay.
There is a tiny bit of revenue that comes from that. And I think we would like to see that be realistic for the next budget. So I assume in the next couple of weeks. I'm happy to let folks know when that does pop onto the agenda.
Thank you. Agenda item number 16, report from school committee chair. In lieu of a report tonight, since I don't have anything to report, I had written a very brief statement regarding board relations about a week and a half ago. Seeing as this meeting got continued from last week, some of this may be a little bit, a couple weeks removed now, but in light of the conversation that was had earlier tonight, I think it's still very pertinent, so I just wanted to very quickly read this. I'm going to take this opportunity to read a statement regarding board relations. I would like to start by briefly addressing what happened at the January 25th meeting in regards to the appointment of members to the chair, vice chair, and parliamentarian roles. I have never used the platform of a school committee member in a self-serving manner, and I have no intention to do so, but I will not allow the false narratives that have been created to continue to spread without addressing it and inviting this entire committee once again to come together and work professionally and appropriately moving forward. During our last discussion and vote on procedural rules, I strongly advocated for full board say in all votes on all appointed positions. This was shot down repeatedly, with some board members stating that the chair should be voted on, but the other positions should be appointments and the chair's decision alone. I disagreed with this then, and I disagree with this now. We are a team, and although we do not need to agree on everything, all members should have a voice in all decisions being made by this committee. At that meeting, I followed procedural rules exactly as written, and just as electing chair is an annual occurrence, so is appointing a vice chair and a parliamentarian. All three of these are done annually. Both as chair and prior to being chair, I have tried to work individually with each board member to improve board relations and better understand one another. I have sent out open invitations to all members to meet to discuss any concerns that they may have multiple times. And as a result of these conversations, I feel confident in saying that the great majority of our board members are in fact working together towards the greater good of our district. Most board members have taken me up on the offer to meet, and we have been able to chat and realize that we are not all that different. We have a lot of the same philosophical ideas on what we are doing for our district, and we are working towards the same common goals for what is best for our students. Board members who have chosen to not have these conversations with me during the entire term are the same members who continue to operate with this idea that I am some kind of an authoritarian bully using the role as chair to carry out evil deeds. I will tell you now publicly that is a very inaccurate impression of me. I've served this community for 6 years as a school committee member and many more years on various subcommittees. These committees have been made up of folks from all walks of life and a wide range of political and ideological beliefs, and I've never before encountered this much infighting or allegations as we have seen on this committee in the last 12 months, and it's not okay. Moving forward, we all need to work together to improve board relations. We all need to set aside differences, perceived or real, and realize that we do our best work when we work as a team. We all need to set an appropriate example for our district and our students and stop the unnecessary squabbling. We can be a unified team if we all choose to be, and I challenge everybody sitting in this room to make that choice. Thank you. Agenda item number 17
Excuse
is
me,
the report
are you
from the
not taking
superintendent.
questions on that?
I wasn't planning on taking questions.
I've got one.
Yes.
You mentioned about the appointment process, and I mean, obviously that was an interesting experience for folks on the board. I was just wondering if you could speak to, whether you had spoken to anyone on the board ahead of time to discuss who you were planning to appoint to positions. I know that obviously I wasn't consulted, but I don't know if you talked to anyone else, or if there was if that was just something that no one had been informed of ahead of time.
I think everyone was informed of it because it's in our procedural rules that were voted on a few months ago. So that would be when anyone was informed that that's something that happens annually.
So no, my question actually was if you had informed anyone on the board of your intention to appoint a different parliamentarian than the one who had been in office prior.
No, I had a conversation with somebody who was interested in that position, and that was the only conversation that I had.
So it'd be fair to say that the only person you talked to about that was a member with them?
I believe so, yeah.
Okay, good to know.
Thank you. Agenda item number 17, report from the superintendent.
I shared the COVID update last week and some other items, but just as a couple of quick things. One is snow days have been, I think, very well received in our community. We took the approach of having snow days and having people not have to work or try to be remote in inclement weather or fight with power outages or what have you. And the feedback has been really good. And I think that's a positive for us. Our community is very appreciative of the kids going out and having a snow day and hopefully having some fun. We did put out some messaging around that. It got a little bit of attention out, I guess. It was on the news and whatnot. Some people were taking up this Lewiston challenge, which was not an intentional challenge, but that's the way it played out. And it's been nice to see people share pictures and post things on social media about how they're taking advantage of their snow day and enjoying themselves. And living in Maine, we should enjoy snow days whenever we can. I do want to share that I envision pitching for next year some kind of combination of snow versus remote days because we have the ability to be remote. We just have to be smart about that to make sure we follow all the rules in place, but also I think it'd be good to have a balance if we have a tough winter next year of taking advantage of those days that are kind of big snow days and having snow days and then having others be remote so that we're not in school until July. So just so you know that those will be coming up. We continue to grow in our equity work. I've mentioned this several times, but we have numerous groups that have formed and are beginning to meet. And the latest one that we're going to begin, I'm working with Aisha as early as the start of March, is an affinity group for parents of students of color who might otherwise feel on different platforms that their voice is not heard the same. And I'll be participating in that group so that I can hear things that they have concerns about, either their own experiences for themselves as parents and guardians or their children who attend our schools. And I'm looking forward to that meeting and hopeful that I can report back some good things from there.
Thank you. School, agenda item number 18, school committee community announcements. Are there any announcements? Ms. Wright.
So I participated in a city spirit exercise looking at the draft equity statement. It was just advertised publicly. I didn't get it through council or school committee or anything, but I would encourage folks if you do run across a time that they're offering that and you're able to participate, it was helpful to just have a look at what's been going on there. I know city spirit has kind of changed a bit over time. And then the other thing that's going on with them, it seems, is the storytelling event at the corner has been moved to virtual and is teaming up with City Spirit LA for stories about community. And I attended their first kind of workshop, and it was just nice to have some sense of community normalcy as a person who works from home and only leaves for school committee meetings. So just wanted to highlight that for folks.
Thank you. Mr. Majerus-Collins.
Yeah, I want to take this opportunity that the community announcements affords to encourage all those who are eligible to get the COVID-19 vaccine to go ahead and get one. We're still in a very small but important segment of the population here that is eligible to start signing up. And anyone out there who can get a vaccine should do that as quickly as possible. Every person that we can get vaccinated moves us that much closer to being able to return our schools to normal. And I know that all the folks in the committee understand the importance of widespread and full vaccination and leading by example. But I also know that with one possible exception, and I'm not even sure, I'm not sure anyone in this committee is yet eligible, but for those out there who are listening who are, please go ahead, sign up, get your vaccines as quickly as possible to get us back towards a normal educational experience.
Thank you. Agenda item number 19, future agenda items. Ms. Wright.
So I would just like to ask that all future agenda items are sent to us on a semi-regular basis when they might fall into the schedule. I know we talked about at the retreat doing a 3 or 6 month plan, and obviously recognizing that things could change, but I think that kind of predictability would really assist us.
Building out the calendar, you mean, right? Yeah. Mr. Putnam?
I'd like a item on the agenda. I have a motion ready to go, addressing the equity of the demographics of the school district and addressing the demographics and equity at each individual school, and with a review with the administration on how to get there.
Mr. Harrison?
I communicated this to the chair and the superintendent directly, but I want to say to the whole committee that I would like to see us take up a proposal to eliminate expulsions as a punishment for elementary school students. It's a straightforward policy decision for the school committee, and I think that it's reasonable that we should be able to take it up by the end of March.
Can I ask a point of order? Wasn't that taken up in the policy committee already? I thought we addressed that.
We talked about it last year before the policy committee met regularly, but I don't believe, I would have to check my notes. It has not been recently reviewed.
Member Hoffman, you, I believe, are speaking to our consideration of changes to the bullying policy. And in the course of that conversation, I made an amendment or a motion to amend to prohibit expulsions for bullying for students who were in pre-K or kindergarten. The committee did not support that, but this is a separate question. This is for the totality of elementary school for all potential offenses. This is something that I know has been introduced in the state legislature this year, and that there's widespread support from the folks that I'm hearing from for moving towards a more compassionate and empathetic process where we categorically rule out the idea of expelling someone from school before they reach middle school.
Mr. Wilmot?
Just to follow on Mr. Juris Collins' agenda item, I don't know if I can say this, but if we were to bring it up, as I know we will,
yeah.
Could we hear from the opinion of the building principals of elementary and how they feel about that?
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Ryan?
Do you know what policy code it is or no?
I don't know, but in my
Look into
communication
it.
to the chair and to the superintendent, the proposal actually has 2 parts. The first part is an immediate ban on any expulsions of elementary school students, period. And the second part is a direction to the policy subcommittee to review the policy manual for any locations where that may be relevant and come back to us by like the end of the summer with a housekeeping amendment.
So we publicly state we're not going to do this anymore,
Right.
and then we go clean
Yes.
up. Okay,
Yeah,
thank you
exactly.
for that
Yeah.
reference. That's helpful.
Agenda item 20, to enter into executive session to discuss a personnel matter in accordance with MRSA 4016A. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second. Ward 2. No, Ward 1.
Yes.
3.
Yes.
4.
Yes.
5.
Yes.
6.
Yes.
7.
Yes.
City Council.
Yes.
Yes.
Motion to go to executive session passes 8-0.